Good evening and welcome to the January 9th, 2025 Louisville Planning Commission meeting with a roll call, please, for attendance.
Chair Bronice,
Here.
Commissioner Moline,
Here.
Commissioner Baskett,
Here.
Commissioner Hunt,
Here.
Commissioner Choi,
Here.
Commissioner Bangs,
Here.
Commissioner Mahaley.
Here.
Thank you. With that, I'd entertain a motion to approve this evening's agenda.
So moved.
Thank you. In a second. All in favor?
Aye.
Thank you. Hearing no dissent. Carries. Looking at the September minutes, did anybody have any corrections that you wanted to call out? Okay, please.
I'm not sure who in staff is responsible for the meeting minute corrections, but on page 9 of our packet, the fifth response is talking about Mark Hill's response to traffic analysis. And it says traffic analysis on South Boulder Road included a diesel lane, and it should be decel lane. Trivial, but
Yes, we do not have any diesel lanes. Thank you for catching that. Nice.
Noted.
And any other corrections to the minutes? Seeing none, would then entertain a motion to approve the September 2024 minutes.
So moved. Second.
All in favor?
I
Aye.
Aye.
I think we were all there.
I'm abstaining because I was not there.
Okay, one abstention. Thank you. Commissioner Hunt on the abstention. All right, I'd now like to open it up for public comment for items that are not on this evening's agenda. If you want to speak something that's not on the agenda, we would welcome that now. If you are online, use the raise hand function. *9 if you're phone only. Seeing none, all right. Thank you all. Couple of new business items here. Housekeeping informational items. We've all been provided with both the 2025 Open Government Packet and the Rules of Procedure. Did anybody have any burning questions they wanted to raise at this point? Yeah. Commissioner Moline.
Yeah, not necessarily a burning question, but I would raise the issue again of having the commission be allowed to make site visits when the sites are large. I think this is something that we've talked about. Maybe even the city attorney has weighed in on this previously, but anyway, I think it's helpful. I think it helps the commission make better decisions. So I don't know if this is exactly the right place to make this plea, but especially for large in area developments, I think it'd be great if we could find a way to allow commissioners to have site visits on them. So.
Great. Thank you. I think you would tend to find support from others on that as well, myself included. Any other additional thoughts? All right, seeing none, we'll jump into our first housekeeping vote item, which is our election of officers for the year going ahead. With that, I would entertain a motion.
Yeah, I've got a motion. I would like to move a full slate of officers, keeping you, Steve, as the chair, and recommending that Commissioner Baskett become the vice chair and that Commissioner Choi become the secretary. So I'll just make just say a short few words here, sorry. I'm excited that you are interested in staying chair and would like to be. I hope you are anyway. And so anyway, I think you do such a great job, and I'm looking forward to having some new members be in our other positions. So, and can't think of any more people well qualified than you two. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much for the kind words. How about a second on that?
I can second that.
Okay, we've got
Hear,
a
hear.
couple of seconds. Second, with Commissioner Bangs, thank you. And then we'll do a roll call vote on this one. Yeah,
Commissioner Choi,
whole slate. Take it or leave it.
Yes.
Commissioner Bangs,
Yes.
Commissioner Basket, Commissioner Moline.
Yes.
Commissioner Mahaley,
Yes.
Commissioner Hunt,
Yes.
Chair Brunice.
Yes, thank you all. Next item of business, the approval of posting locations for the agendas. It's same as it's been for quite a long time now. I believe it's City Hall, Recreation Center, Police Station, and Library. I guess we can vote on that. How about we just do a voice vote? All in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Hearing no dissent, the motion carries. Approval of our expected Planning Commission 2025 meeting dates. This doesn't need a vote, really. We can,
It was requested to be a vote, so I think
Okay,
you could do a
let's
quick
do it.
voice vote if you want.
Let's do it.
Second Thursday of each month.
second Thursday with overflow on the fourth Thursday. Study sessions as requested by City Council. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Hearing no opposition, the motion carries. And then we'll move into our real issue of the evening, the comprehensive plan discussion. I'm not sure who's gonna tee that off.
Are we going straight to the consultant with that? Or-
I had a few things to
Yeah.
kind of tee things up, and then if you have anything to add as
Yeah,
well.
let me
go
just
ahead.
add
Yeah.
something. So we'll hand it off here and get to our consultants. I just wanted to mention just a little bit of background. The city council, over the last year, as they've done their budgeting for 2025, they've identified certain priorities for 2025. In fact, they're going to have a work planning discussion at their meeting next week, so you may all want to join in on that. But I wanted to mention a couple of I wanted to read off what their guiding priorities have been, because it influenced the comprehensive plan and some of the discussions this evening. But they've determined that their 4 top priorities for 2025 are economic vitality, core services, safety, and affordable housing. So those are City Council's top 4 priorities for 2025. And then they've added having equity, diversity, and inclusion, EDI, and sustainability as core values, and should be used as a lens through which to view all of those priorities and their actions on those priorities. So I think, as you'll see, certainly all these things will influence the comprehensive plan, but especially economic vitality and affordable housing, especially with the land use plan that we're discussing this evening. So I just wanted to kind of give that background. And Commissioner Mahaley has a
Could
question.
you, 2 questions. A, could you repeat those 4 priorities? And is there an element of, order or preference in those, or is it just sort of these are the top 4?
They're the top 4 priorities. They're going to really dig into them. These are just topics, and then how they address those priorities will be talked about next week. They'll adopt a plan, but it's economic vitality, core services, safety, and affordable housing, all through the lens of EDI and sustainability. So that's just a little kind of council priority, and again, some of that will relate to the comp plan.
Go ahead, Jeff. Did you have a?
Yeah, I was just gonna, thanks, Rob, for that. I guess a quick question. Yeah.
Jessica's asking you to do something, showing up on the screen would be, yeah, there too. You may need to take care of that while we're talking.
I'm sorry, we couldn't hear that.
Can you hear me, Jessica?
Yeah, we can hear you.
Okay. Do you need to be promoted to share your presentation? Is that the issue?
Yeah, I'm promoted. I need to be able to share from
Okay.
Yeah.
A host?
my computer.
Okay,
Oh, I got it. Thank you.
okay,
Okay,
we're
great,
good on
thanks.
that.
Sorry to interrupt.
Okay.
No, that's
Commissioner
great.
Green, go
That's
ahead.
fine. So thanks. I appreciate hearing that. And I'm just wondering, those seem like they're fairly consistent with the values that we laid out in the comp plan. Am I Am I right about that, or?
I think there's definitely overlap
Okay.
with them. And then, of course, the guiding, kind of the endorsed guiding principles is we do have the vision statement and then the
Yes.
core community values.
Yes.
That they've been reviewed by you and city council.
Yeah.
They're not adopted yet. Of course, they'd be adopted with the plan, so they could change
Yeah.
over the course of this review. But those are, they're in the packet. I think the staff report and the consultant's report kind of addresses how what we're talking about aligns with those as well.
Yeah, okay,
But that's all up for discussion.
Okay, yep. I just wanted to make sure I was thinking that they aligned pretty well. So, okay, thank you. Great. Thanks.
And I just had a few quick things, and we'll turn it over to Allison and Jessica. I wanted to just tee up that, we just finished our third round of community engagement on this project, basically right before Thanksgiving. We wanted to get to you really quickly after that to focus on the future land use framework. That's really a foundational part of this. And we wanted to get that in front of you sooner than later so we can sort of iterate and be in a position to adopt, hopefully in the summer. So wanted to make sure you knew that was kind of our priority, was to start that discussion and surface it with the community and everything. The other thing I wanted to say was, so the team's recommendations that are set forth in the memo, when you look at those tables for the future land use recommendations, those were done very much through the lens of the core values and what council has landed on. There's a lot of alignment there. And I'll in particular emphasize that as a reminder that City Council adopted the housing plan earlier this year in May, which has 3 really clear goals. Policy goals to increase residential development opportunities. So we took that as a policy direction to integrate into the plans. That was very much part of our lens for these recommendations. Among other recommendations around economic vibrancy, it's all kind of articulated in the memo. And I also wanted to point out, there's no magic formula to this work. I think a lot of folks think that there's some magical spreadsheet where if you just input certain things, it outputs and that's your answer. But the truth is there's a very Louisville specific balance that needs to happen here, and that's why we're starting this discussion now. And then the last thing I wanted to just make sure you're aware that we did get public comments on this item. Very thoughtful, helpful, and welcome comments on this. We love it. I think there were 9 total comments. There's hard copies on the wall. All of them should have made them to you via email. So that's the last thing I'll say, and then I'll go ahead and turn it over to Allison and or Jessica if you all are ready to kind of tee up the discussion.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you so much. There we go. We are really glad to be with you tonight. Again, as Jeff said, we've been going through some community engagement at the end of 2024, and we're really excited to kind of kick off 2025 with you talking about the comprehensive plan. And so tonight we wanted to go through just an update of where we are at in the process, talk through community engagement, and then spend most of our time in conversation around the future land use map, and then we'll talk through some next steps as well. We have completed a number of items for you in the packet. There is a memorandum and community engagement summary that we've pulled together. We are trying to, give me just one second. This is advancing when it shouldn't be. And I'm gonna try to override that. So up on the upper right-hand side of the page, we are identifying the page number of either the memorandum or the community engagement summary where you might find some of this information. So trying to help you follow along. So where are we now? In terms of the plan process, we are really excited to be in the strategies and implementation portion of our work. We've gone through a number of community engagement exercises, starting all the way from our kickoff in 2024 and going through some focus group conversations. We did a lot of existing conditions work, and then moving into community engagement kind of March really through the beginning of December on the plan. As we move forward, we are looking for a draft plan for you in the spring and then adoption in the summer. So again, done a lot of work so far and have a lot of information. We've shared it with you in the past, so we're not going to run through all of those things tonight, but they are all available on Engage Louisville. We are in that phase 4 and are excited to move through that with you into the summer. We have completed initial project templates and table of contents, which were included in the memorandum. We are in process for working through different refining of the scenarios that were part of the community engagement in November, and that work is really going to be informed by a conversation tonight. And then in March and April, we will anticipate an 80% draft moving into adoption. So again, community engagement work to date, lots has been going on, and we will continue opportunities for the community to stay involved as we move into community engagement window 3 with preparing the plan information. So tonight, really quickly wanted to run through some information on what we have heard thus far. We held a number of events in November 8th. We had 3 90-minute workshops that we had really detailed conversation with community members who came and kind of did their own future land use map and worked through that, and some really great conversation there. We also had an open house that evening, and there were over 150 people participating. And we wanted to also make sure there was an online opportunity for folks. And so we did have a story map where just over 80 people participated in the process. And so we were really excited to have that level of participation. So we have also gone through a number of meetings with you to talk through the core values, as we said. We asked for some feedback in the open house related to those core values, and got some good feedback that I'll run through here in just a moment. So again, those core values are community character, environmental sustainability, community connectivity, community places, civic leadership, and economic vibrancy. And at the core of that is a community that is equitable, resilient, sustainable, and vibrant. So some of the key findings that we heard from the community, first on community character, a real interest in continuing to look at and having additional opportunities for affordable housing, preserving the small town charm of Louisville, and revitalization of downtown. In terms of environmental sustainability, we heard support for looking at fire mitigation, disaster planning, really thinking about decarbonization and the climate. In terms of community connectivity, looking at opportunities to increase regional coordination for trails as well as for transit, and really making sure that Louisville is part of that larger regional system of connections. In terms of community places, some interest in looking at opportunities for senior housing, and then continuing to preserve natural areas and making sure that there are great opportunities for parks, recreation facilities, outdoor plazas, things like that. For civic leadership, some interest in additional civic opportunities. Again, regional collaboration came up quite a bit as part of that core value area, and then continued engagement with city council and elected and appointed officials. And then finally, for economic vibrancy, real interest as we got in particularly to conversations on the different scenarios, an interest in mixed use development, supporting local businesses, really enhancing the McCaslin corridor area, and then looking at having diverse retail. I'll turn it to Allison to run through scenarios.
Okay. Well, great to see you all again. Thank you, Jess. As mentioned, a comprehensive plan is really intended to guide and direct that future decision-making about growth and development in the city. And so an important tool of that is the future land use map, which we'll be talking about later this evening. But before we developed this map, we really wanted to listen to the community about what that future might look like. And so scenario planning, which was really the focus of our engagement this past November and December, is a tool to explore different ways in which that might happen. So you can see the two circles in the middle. Those community engagement activities were really focused on looking at a range of potential scenarios that are informed by driving forces. So thinking about all the research that we've done to date to inform what those possible futures might be. And then what we asked the community was to help us evaluate those trade-offs. And so tonight we're going to share with you what we've heard from that so that we can develop a preferred scenario, which is ultimately reflected in our future land use map. One of the things that was really driving force for the scenarios that came forward was recognizing that there's parts of Louisville that are really doing really well. And so what was a guiding factor here was this idea of areas of stability, places like existing neighborhoods, parks, businesses that are pretty well rooted in the community and align well with the community values that are unlikely to see substantive change in the future. In contrast, we identified areas of opportunity or places with vacant parcels, possibilities for redevelopment sites, or underutilized sites that might have more opportunities to see different types of development in the future that align with those community values. And so the scenarios that we're going to explore will look at different ways that areas within these 4 opportunity areas might be able to shift and address gaps of need within the community. So this slide shows those 4 areas of opportunity that were really the focus of our scenario plan. It was South Boulder Road, the downtown area, McCaslin Corridor, and Red Tail Ridge. And as I mentioned, these are just areas where there's the most opportunity for potential land use change, and we wanted to understand what the community appetite for that is. So before we get too deep, I wanted to pause for a moment and share with you some of the driving forces. And all of this really came out of those existing conditions assessments that we did that are on the website. And that included environmental assessment, an economic assessment, transportation assessment, and a land use assessment. And so we took all of this really great data and pulled out some of the big ideas or some trends that might help to inform what these scenarios are moving forward. And we really use this information as a foundation for thinking about the different scenarios and understanding what some of those different trade-offs might be. We talked about this in great detail at the open houses. I'll just touch on it very lightly here. But really it's that the population is declining and aging and that housing is increasing. And so there's a little bit of a continued trend that puts that sense of community at risk. There's another trend around transportation, that a significant amount of the community leaves Louisville for work every day, and another percentage of the community is commuting in. And so what this is suggesting is that not everyone is living and working in Louisville, and this has an impact on roadway congestion as well as retail spending, which leads to kind of this economic vibrancy story where the employment base is really strong. There's a really strong jobs market in Louisville, but because of this commutership, it's likely that residents are spending money out of Louisville. So from an economic standpoint, there's a lot of leakage or money that's not being spent in your community. And then probably no surprise to anyone here, Louisville is a really wonderful trails and parks network that is really part of the sense of place. When we talk with the community, this is a very important value. And connected to that is this idea that downtown is really the heart, that there's a lot of character there. It's part of what people really love about living in the community. So as I mentioned, these driving forces really are intended to guide and direct the three scenarios that we shared with the community. I'm going to look at these from a very high level. Scenario A looks at maintaining the current trends. So in general, this keeps things to typically, like from a land use perspective, keeps it to typically single use land uses, meaning a commercial area is mostly commercial, an office area is just office. And it has the lowest number of new units projected, the highest number of jobs created, kind of maintaining that current trend for the community. And what we heard from the community on this one is that there's really support for this idea of keeping the community scale kind of small and minimal kind of idea of minimal growth. There was the trade-off with that is this doesn't address housing affordability and inclusivity, as well as kind of creating those vibrant commercial spaces in the ways that B and C did, which we did hear from the community was important. But people really liked that this one was a little bit lower density, had a bit more open space, and might be able to continue some of those mix of uses into the core areas. Scenario B was focused on housing. So it put a substantial focus on development of housing throughout the community. It looked at mixed and diverse types of housing in each of the 4 opportunity areas, and really thinks about creating synergies between existing development and opportunities for infill housing. You'll see jobs and housing are a little bit more balanced in this scenario, so that when there's jobs growth, there's also housing growth to help kind of provide places for the workforce to live. And in this alternative, housing is generally proposed at kind of a mid-level density and increasing mixed use in different areas. And so what we heard from the community on this one is they really liked the focus on housing. And they liked this idea of balancing job growth and housing growth, especially at Red Tail Ridge and along McCaslin. There was some concerns expressed about the higher density housing, but once again, kind of recognized that affordability and attracting families was something that the community really did want to see. And finally, live and work in Louisville was really thinking about emphasizing both housing and economic development. And in this scenario, we're looking more at hubs of activity, thinking about community and neighborhood centers. And at those centers, having higher densities and increased retail and commercial options. So whereas the scenario B was a bit more spread out through the community, this really looks at focusing some of that development around core areas, creating hubs of activities and centers for development. And people really resonated with that idea. They thought that this was a good sustainable option, as well as supporting the economic vibrancy. The idea of kind of some transit-oriented development around the higher density areas was something that resonated with people. There was some concern over increased housing units, especially at Red Tail Ridge, and making sure that there was compatibility with the lower density character of that area. But kind of as I mentioned, I think this idea of clustering development into core areas was something that the community really resonated with. This board, we won't spend too much time here. We just wanted to share that one of the communication tools we had at the open house was recognizing that there were trade-offs between each of these scenarios. And so we used those community values that we shared with all of you in August as a lens for how to look at the differences between these 3 scenarios and recognize that increasing affordable housing also might require increasing density. Thinking about transit connectivity, also, balanced with more vehicular-oriented travel. So really thinking about what those trade-offs are between the scenarios so that you can make some assessments of, if I want this, then I might have to explore this. And so one of the big questions that we asked at the open house was asking the community what they liked about each scenario and what they didn't like about each scenario. And we did ask for them to choose which one that they would prefer. And we see that in the online responses, we gave an other option, and there was a fill in the blank of why you chose that other option. And the next slide kind of shares a little bit about what is in that other scenario. And so for participants who selected this option, generally made note that, they wanted to make sure that the small town character was maintained, that they want to make sure the roads weren't kind of caused, they didn't want to see more congestion on the roadways, or not be able to support additional housing or jobs. But there was also comments around focusing on infill development, the focus on transit along certain corridors, and ensuring that affordability and sustainable options were incorporated into future planning. Overall, most of the comments that chose other were really looking to see a trade-off of a middle ground scenario. So taking bits of A, bits of B, and bits of C, and integrating it into kind of a holistic approach for the future. And that's a lot of what we want to talk about with you this evening, is what that looks like. So we're just going to pause here in our discussion. We have several more slides that are going to dig deeper into what we heard in each of the opportunity areas that will align with the information in your packet. But we wanted to pause here for just like 5 minutes of discussion regarding these scenarios to ensure that we're headed in the right direction before digging a little bit deeper into the specifics. And so we wanted to just pause, like I said, for about 5 minutes and think about the question based on these 3 scenarios that were presented to the community, the feedback received in the community engagement summary, as well as what we just shared. Which one most closely aligns with your vision for what that future land use map look like? And what do you think should be reflected from the community's vision of what we've heard through the engagement summary?
So as we move into that discussion, I want to know we have 5 people in the room and then a number of people online who are going to want to share their thoughts on this. I'm not exactly certain when we should open up for that. I was thinking maybe after we have some discussion amongst the commission. Yeah.
I think there's going to be some pretty substantive information after this. I think this is just a little bit of a touch base with the commission. There'll be some pretty significant information that they may want to, the public may want to.
Yeah.
So I'd maybe recommend trying to keep this concise, letting the consultants get through the last part of the presentation and then getting feedback once they've finished their presentation.
Great. All right. Also, Jeff, in the meantime, can you get the public comments that were received to the consultants? Can you email it to them so they can see those as well?
The comments that you all, they've already seen it.
Okay, great. All right, thanks.
I know it's probably not proper, but I'm a school bus driver and I have to wake up at 5. So thank you for considering.
Okay, cool. So we'll chat for a little bit then. How much, after we have this 5-minute discussion, how long do you think that, you said it's a few slides for a presentation?
Yeah, we are going to get into more detail on each of the kind of focus areas, and we'll get into the future land use map more specifically, and the future land use categories. So we have, I think, about eight or so slides before we get to the next questions that were in your packet.
Okay, great. Thanks. Then we'll just open it up kind of wide open if anybody had thoughts they wanted to share. Yeah, Commissioner.
So is now an appropriate time to ask questions of what's been presented thus far?
Sure. Yeah, we may not get the full answer right now because there's more information forthcoming.
Yeah, and I guess if nothing else, at least one of these may seed discussion forthcoming. So I guess I'll just open it up. So for the scenarios A, B, and C, one thing I didn't see too much detail on was where the distribution of new housing came from. And so, and it was different for each case in terms of which one was weighted more highly. So I would love to hear more detail about where those numbers come from for scenarios A, B, and C. Like if I'm reading it right, I think for scenario A, South Boulder Road was the heaviest. And that wasn't true for any of the other scenarios. So I'm curious as to where that weighting came from and what assumptions went into that. Because I think that is going to be a big part of the discussion hereafter in terms of where, especially in terms of finding a middle ground, like where should stuff go and at what level.
All right, thank you. Let's just kind of cue it up for you all to speak to in a little bit here. As far as their questions of us, did anybody have any reactions to those scenarios that they want to share at this time?
I would just add that the scenarios are made for people to react to, and the scenarios were also made for people to fill in the blanks with the specifics of where things go, and everything's moving. So it was, I think the idea isn't, hey, we're just going to pick one of these at the end of the day. It's more about blending the concepts that seem to fit the best with the vision and values and the input we're getting and the feedback we get from you all. So I think maybe what we're asking here is just giving your initial reaction will help just provide another layer of input for the consultants. So I might even just recommend if you have maybe going through and, if you don't have an initial reaction or saying, well, I thought scenario X had these great things in it, or I didn't like scenario Y because of this, if you have anything to say, and then that might just get us to the next stage.
Okay, we can try. Yeah, Commissioner Hunt, if you had some thoughts you want to share, thank you.
I found these kind of fascinating as I was reading through them. A little hard to sort of parse out the exact differences, and I think the presentation was really helpful on that. But what, based on commission priorities that we've heard tonight and some of the community values, it strikes me, my first reaction is that option A or scenario A really doesn't move the ball in any useful ways, because I think we're at least what I've heard so far is that what's happening now isn't really working. I think B and C both have a lot to offer. I understand the concerns raised about changing Louisville and all that stuff. I think change is coming, whether we want it or not, in the form of sometimes even state mandates that we're going to have to do. So I want to be sensitive to that. But my first reaction is that scenario C, I kind of like the idea of acknowledging we need to grow somewhat and thinking about clustering. I kind of like that idea because I think it addresses some of the concerns about neighborhood character and too much change, while still and also sustainability issues and encouraging more affordable housing. So those are my initial thoughts.
Great, thank you very much.
Sure. Oh, go Deborah. Go, Commissioner Baskett. Yeah.
So what I was struck with in the scenarios, and I participated in the open houses, is that we're really talking about working around the edges. And that is very different than changing the existing fabric of the community. I think it knits together the edges pretty well to think about where the location of new housing and commercial development might be. So I'm not sure where I'm going to come down between B and C or a blend of it as we evolve this, but that's where my thoughts are right now.
So the edges, are you referring like to
South
the literal
Boulder
edges?
Road.
Yes.
Literal
As Lynn
edges,
and-
the
and
4
Redtail, yeah.
opportunity areas are on the edges.
Yeah. Great, thanks.
Can I, kind of to that end, one of the things if I could ask you, Commissioner Baskett, did you think that there should be something more happening from a plan perspective inside the town, or that wasn't necessarily where you were?
Well, I have a sense that there's not a lot of undeveloped land.
Right.
So really the ADUs are the opportunity within the developed community.
Yeah.
And other than that, I wasn't seeing anything.
Okay. Thank you. That is maybe one thing, if I could just add, is I wondered if that was something that that the plan should consider, is trying to address some of the housing within some of the the core of the town and in existing neighborhoods. I didn't see that in any of the scenarios, I don't think, and I understand why that might be true, but just a consideration again, maybe like along the lines of ADUs, for example.
Yeah, I mean, I think we're focusing on opportunity areas geographically, but that doesn't mean we can't have policies that address the other areas of the community.
Okay,
And I think,
okay.
so that's part of this discussion, is hearing those types of things. I think it's it's open for discussion.
Okay,
Yeah.
thanks.
I mirror some of the things that you were saying about how the focus areas ended up being, you know, the areas that are not the core residential, right, development. I think all that area in the city has developed over time very organically to just fit the needs of the people that are there, and that the perimeter or the, you know, the extents, the limits of the city are the places that have, for all intents and purposes, somewhat been neglected in the intentional development, right? Which is where the two meet up of saying, hey, here's where the focus should be with the highest impact. I agree with Commissioner Hunt that, you know, change is coming, and I would much rather be deliberate about how we facilitate that change in a planned and you know, anticipatory way, rather than just being caught on our heels and saying, oh, look, now here's the northwest corner that just spurred out and we weren't really sure how to deal with it. And so this stuff just kind of happened. And so I do like the idea of, you know, some of the more aggressive components of options B and C, or scenarios B and C, where it is more intentional. It feels more planned to try to strategically achieve some of the objectives that align with both the vision components of the comprehensive plan and what we've heard City Council wants to adopt in terms of priorities for 2025 and above. I think the difficulty for me was that as I read through the different scenarios and, you know, all of the different evaluations about what could be included, there's so much emphasis on, you know, really the land use and how the land could be built up in whatever configuration, but there wasn't an emphasis, and it almost highlights the focus on the perimeter pockets rather than the core. There wasn't any real significant focus on the interfaces of these pockets, or the interfaces of the buildable land with the transportation. And I know we talk a little bit about transportation-oriented design, you know, but to me, there's a missing piece that says, not only how do we bring transportation to that development, or how do we get people out of that development onto transportation, but how do we integrate transportation in all the right ways between all of the different elements, right? And so really weaving together the opportunities to deconflict the vehicles, the pedestrians, the bicycles that we know there are going to be. You know, if we could have a little bit more intentionality about that interface and that deconfliction, I think that then it truly becomes more of a transportation inclusive, comprehensive idea.
So I agree with a lot of what's been said, and really resonate with Commissioner Choi's comments and thoughts. So I guess, besides what's already been said, in terms of where I would land answering the question from the consultant, you know, I would also be in the other category, looking for a middle, and in particular, thinking, you know, which is why I asked about the distribution of new development, because I think we can be very intentional about that, to strategically think about where things can be located to preserve and expand upon the city's character while also addressing needs. And so, you know, for that reason, I have a variety of thoughts and reasons of why certain things should go where, which I guess I'll save to further discussion, but I think they would be in line with especially Commissioner Choi's comments about transportation. So I would also be in the other category. I agree that option A, I don't think will help us address our goals. I'm not sure whether I'm closer to option C or B. I think probably C, but again, the distribution and weighting of where things are going will play a heavy role in, you know, dictating what that answer finally becomes.
Great. Thank you very much. Commissioner Bangs, I can't see whether you're waving your hands wildly there. I guess not. Yes.
No. I mean, in the interest of time, I just endorse everything that's really been shared. The goals necessitate a blend of B and C. I'm not sure how we achieve our goals with A. And of course, the devil is in the details. So I'm interested in more information in the packet. So
great. Yeah. Thank you. Thank you very much. All right. I think you got more than your 5 minutes worth. If we can invite.
Sorry.
Yes.
We were trying
That was wonderful. Thank you.
well, amazing comments. We
Appreciate it. Yeah. We're gonna move next into talking through the future land uses and future land use map. The future land use map is a really important part of a comprehensive plan. It is what will inform the work that you do on future policies, but also on future rezonings. And as you're thinking about updating your codes that really do dictate what happens with development. And so it's a really important piece that guides those future decisions. And it just represents the way that land is intended to be used, based again on the core values that are in the comprehensive plan and the community's goals and vision. We had, as I mentioned at the beginning, a really great activity where we had community members sort of create their own future land use map in different scenarios. And it was really helpful and gave a lot of color about where things might go, but it also required participants to have some tough conversations within their groups to think about what are the trade-offs and where would we put housing versus mixed use versus full kind of a commercial development. And so it was a really, really helpful and robust conversation. I am going to turn it again to Allison to run through some more detail on what that activity was and just the different areas in more detail.
Yep. So you can see, I had so much fun at these workshops. I think staff did too. They were really, really robust, engaging conversations, and we just met so many lovely Louisville residents. Here's just some pictures from the day. We had 3 of these different workshops that were followed by the open house. And I'm going to share with you specifically what we kind of summarized. I think we had 15 different maps with stickers all over the place, and we kind of put them all together. And what you're seeing on your screen is a summary of all of the different pieces put together into one. And so for Opportunity Area 1, which is the South Boulder Road corridor, there was really a desire for mixed use. There were several comments saying that this would be a really great location for affordable housing and senior housing, especially in kind of that northern quadrant, kind of that northern section right on the edge of Louisville. There was some desire to see some increased parks connectivity. There's some missing trails connections in this area that got identified. And then along South Boulder Road, a desire to see some adaptive reuse and infill development. So there is a little bit of more kind of strip commercial in that area, that there might be opportunities to infill the spaces in between or reuse some of what's existing along that corridor in a different way. So when we get into the future land use approach that you'll see in your packet, what we are thinking the direction we'd like to head for this is looking at mid-density, so around 3-story residential in some locations, especially as you get closer to South Boulder Road and Highway 42, and think about some mixed use with residential by right.
One of the other pieces that we heard, just picking up on some of your comments related to connectivity, we heard about the importance of making sure that people can really get across South Boulder Road in a safe way. And so as we refine the future land use map and some of the strategies around transportation, this is an area where we would anticipate seeing some language about that trail connectivity that Allison mentioned, but also getting people safely across that street, whether that be an underpass, different ways to deal with the lights, things like that.
So the second opportunity area is downtown Louisville. And on this scenario, we noted the opportunity for a potential transit line, maybe well into the future, kind of in kind of the upper northern section where you see those 200 units, there would be a potential transit line there. And so we did hear some desire to maybe see some increased density adjacent to that potential future transit line when it comes in. But then we also heard a lot about downtown, that downtown is thriving and vibrant and people love it, but that to be a successful, vibrant downtown, you need people. And people living in downtown can help to support that. And so there was definitely some desire from the community to see more residential above ground floor retail to promote that retail vibrancy. And the idea that maybe some 3-story buildings, more mixed use buildings in downtown might be able to help increase some of the retail success and really that downtown central vibe. So when it comes to the future land use approach, we'd like to recommend in this area that mid-density and mixed-use residential up to 3 stories in certain locations might be the direction that we are headed for the future land use map. Really thinking about key sites for infill development with residential by right, as well as I think one of the other things that came out through not necessarily the scenario planning, but through the values conversation was how important community gathering is and having spaces and places to come together. And so downtown is really an opportunity to seek some more gathering spaces. There was some recommendations for maybe increasing parks, increasing streetscape, increasing the events and things so that downtown can continue to be that central hub that really brings Louisville residents together. Opportunity Area 3, McCaslin Corridor, was so interesting. We had such fascinating conversations. I think overall, there's really a desire to see McCaslin Corridor become more vibrant, become more mixed use. And there was a lot of conversation around the Cinnabar site and seeing some of those properties adjacent to Highway 36 with the transit station that will be there become higher density than what's there today, but ensuring that the roadways continue to be safe and accessible, and thinking about integrating more green networks and multimodal connectivity onto what's kind of an auto-centric area. So really thinking about this as more of a central place, thinking about some density adjacent to Highway 36. And then I think another thing that really came out was in kind of the northwest corner, there's 2 undeveloped parcels that are currently zoned office. There was definitely some desire to see more housing integrated along Centennial Boulevard. Even thinking about that integration of housing as you get closer towards McCaslin on some of the southern sites as well. So when it comes to the future land use map, what we're thinking is that mid-density residential on Centennial Boulevard, so rezoning that from office, thinking about increasing higher density on Highway 36, 4, possibly up to 5 stories in key locations, and then really thinking about the parks and trails connection, and I would even say bike lane connectivity, to ensure that if we are creating kind of this more multimodal transit-oriented center here, that it's connected to a network throughout Louisville so that it's accessible by car, by bike, by walking, and can be a safe, comfortable, and accessible space.
And I think one of the things that was really interesting in the conversations that we had very specifically about this area was a real thoughtfulness from community members as they dug into this of making sure that there's a recognition that there are some single family neighborhoods and lower density sort of to the north and to the east, and sort of feathering in the density. So you're not going to a really high density right next to an existing neighborhood, that you're being more gradual as you move south towards Highway 36 and the CU parcels, and really a recognition that there's some things that are going to happen there from CU's perspective, and just maybe want to recognize that as part of the future land use map.
And finally, Red Tail Ridge, which is just such an interesting thing when it comes to future land use planning, because it's so rare to work in a community where you have this much acreage undeveloped, and just how influential and impactful that can be to the future of Louisville. in general, what we heard from the community was that there really needs to be a balance of jobs, housing, and open space. And you can see that reflected in the stickers here, that there's quite a bit of open space desired, but also recognizing that this could be a really great location for commercial, for goods and services, knowing that the hospital is in this area, and relocating. A lot of thought about what that Avista site might become, that could be a really great opportunity to include some mid-density housing, or even higher density housing to support the additional jobs that will come in on the Red Hill Ridge site. So really thinking about this balance, wanting this area to be integrated and self-sufficient. So making sure that it's connected, that people here have access to the goods and services. They're not having to drive 5 miles to get what they need, that this can really be a self-sustaining place that has people living there, working there, that the transit is connected and safe, and that it feels like a part of Louisville, but can also be self-sustaining. And thinking about what the impacts of that might be on overall transit networks, as well as connectivity through the roadway networks, and ensuring that the roads can handle the capacity of these increased uses. So when we think about the future land use in this area, thinking about mid to high density housing, 3 to 4 stories in certain areas, really considering transit connections, especially near the hospital site. Thinking about that mix of housing and office, there's already a lot of people commuting into Louisville, ensuring that as jobs are added, housing is also added so people can continue to live and work here. And then just the importance of green space and trails, and making sure that that's an integral part of how Red Hill Ridge comes to fruition. So that brings us to kind of the last page that we'll present with you. This is the last, or second to last. This is the last page in our packet, which really just kind of highlights what I've shared with you already through this summary diagram about what we've heard, and thinking about land use that's focused in density in key areas, really supporting a diversity of housing types throughout the community so that you can increase affordability, ensuring that as future development comes in, transit, roadway connectivity is still safe, and that there are trails connections, recognizing the employment sector and that jobs are critical to the economy, but that also retail and events kind of supports that community gathering and well-being, ensuring the preservation of open spaces and making sure there's places for people to come together, thinking about sustainability in all of this, how all of this is really connected to live more sustainably and make more sustainable choices. And then ensuring that equity is interwoven as well through affordable housing, ensuring that the needs of all residents are met, and access to transit for people of all modes of ability. So we're really excited to hear from you about how to move this forward. I'm going to pass it to Jess, who's going to wrap us up with what's in your packet. I think on page 4, it's covered. What's in your packet on page 7, which talks about the future land use classifications. This is kind of the partner to a future land use map.
Yeah, and so we wanted to just call attention to this because in the scenarios, we really have focused on these kind of 4 areas as areas where there's potentially opportunity for change or adjustment. And then there are other areas of the community that really will be kind of maintained in all likelihood in the way that they are right now. And so it's really important that the future land use map include classifications for all of those different land uses. So that is parks and open space, low density residential, all the way up to mixed use and higher density residential. And so within your packet, we've included information on this first draft, right? What would the characteristics for these different types of land use classifications look like? And so what we've identified, started to identify, and really excited to get your feedback on as we move forward, is the different types of uses that would be in each of these categories. So retail and office in commercial, for instance, or primarily single family detached residential in the low density residential category. In land use classifications that would have residential units. We're identifying a dwelling units per acre. That's the DU/AC on this slide and in the packet. And then we're also identifying the number of stories that might be anticipated in these different classifications. And we can come back to this in more detail if needed. But we did want to move to our next set of questions for you, which is really about the future land use map, and wanting to know your comments, support, questions, things you would change about the approach for the future land use map. So specifically, what would you like to be carried forward when we're thinking about kind of combining some of the scenarios that we went through? What are things that we should not bring forward, that should not be considered? And then any comments you have on the different future land use classifications.
So then moving forward right now, are you wanting us to jump into that, or?
And then I think you'll have to consider when you want to take public comment as well.
Yeah.
If you want to do that now or have some discussion first.
I'm actually kind of inclined towards public comment. Yeah, people are feeling that'd be okay. All right. Yeah. So we'll open it up now for members of the public who joined the meeting in person, by computer, or telephone. You can speak regarding this comp plan. If you're here in person, I've got a number of speaker cards up here. Thank you. Use the raise hand function if you're on the computer, or *9 if you're calling in by telephone. Please limit your comments to 3 minutes per person. 2 people who are joining the meeting may pool their minutes to allow 1 person to speak for up to 6 minutes. And this is slightly different than standard approach, but it is, we just want to hear what's on your minds. So if we can begin with Ms. Summer, welcome you up. And then what do we look like online? Okay. And then Mr. Parcher, you'll be on deck.
Sherry Summer, and I really appreciate it. I'm concerned that this comprehensive plan is going to be like stuffing 30 pounds of flour into a 10-pound sack. And I think that where we're going to see that is in the things that are not being said tonight. We're talking about affordable housing, which, is great. Will all of this land be zoned specifically for affordable housing? Is that even legal? Who will build so much affordable housing? Or is it going to be market rate housing? Scenario A, by the way, would meet the county's requirements for affordable housing. We talk about having more supply, and that will bring more affordable housing, but let's look at Boulder. Has that helped there? No. The prices continue to go up and up. Let's talk about the state requirements that we're not talking about that are totally not connected to this comprehensive plan. That's housing adjacent to transportation lines, which I've heard, and I don't even know if this figure is right, but it's like 70,000 residents of Louisville. I mean, it's a lot of residents, and including by the Dash. The Dash goes through Louisville a quarter mile adjacent to the Dash route, 40 units per acre. ADUs are going to be required by the state in every single family house. So that will be taken care of. CU housing, we're not counting how much that will be. We don't even know how much that will be. We've got these taglines, live and work in Louisville. Well, there's no requirement if you live here that you work here, if you work here, if you live here. We can't mandate that, and it's not happening. It doesn't happen by itself. Housing for all, it sounds good, but what about the level of service at the rec center? The city offices are already past bursting. The library, how are we going to have the same level of service when we have so many more residents? Mixed use, I keep hearing about that. I remember Mayor Stoltzman said, why don't we just come up and say, we just want more housing, because mixed use doesn't get passed. They say it'll be mixed use, and you're like, oh, that's great. And then it dwindles down and down, it just becomes all housing. How about development paying its own way? I know with the North End and Steel Ranch, there wasn't enough planning for the water supply. And so water rates for everyone in Louisville went up 7% over 10 years, which is a doubling of our water rates. We need to make sure that all the residents of Louisville now are not going to be having unaffordable housing. What is this going to cost us? What's not being said? we're talking about city council values, but what about the community's values? When I ran for mayor last year, I knocked on everybody's door and I said, what do you love about Louisville? And people, I bet 98% of people said, we love the community feeling. We love the scale. Don't make us like Boulder. Small town character. What about fiscal health? Is this going to lead to fiscal health? And also, I want to ask about Bill Rigler with Greenlight Strategies. Please look it up. He brags about getting Red Tail Ridge passed. He was here the night it was passed, and he works through the quasi-judicial process. Who's pulling the strings in the city? Is it the people or a consultant from the outside who brags about overcoming the democratic process? Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Parcher, and then let's see, there are raised hands on the online? 4, okay. Who'll be next? And Ms. Solik, you'll be on deck. We'll join you in on the call here in a few minutes, please.
Good evening, Don Parcher, 378 Grouse Court, over 10 years, granddad to 2 young boys, and I want to thank you for your service. I'd like to ask that in your planning decisions that you make, that you consider that I believe we are past the tipping point on climate change and loss of biodiversity. So I ask that you do what you can to limit the use of fossil fuels and increase housing density. So no estate homes, maybe no more single family detached. There's a book called Half Earth in which Pulitzer Prize winning author Edward O. Wilson argues that if we don't set aside half the Earth's land surface for biodiversity to recover, humanity may not have more than 100 years left, for what it's worth. There's only so much that individuals can do. We have solar panels, 2 EVs, we've got rid of our grass. It's up to people like you to really move things along. And what I'd like to see is Louisville be a model for other communities in this regard. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. And sorry, again, the person who's online.
Yes.
And if
Okay,
come
so we
back to the
have,
room,
Betty
Ms. Pine, you'll be on
Yeah,
deck.
Betty.
Hello, I've just been unmuted. My name is Betty Solek. First of all, I wanted to alert you that there were some people waiting to get in the meeting and the door was locked downstairs. So hopefully those people went home and got on Zoom, but there may have been some people who wanted to attend and were not able to because of the door lock situation. First of all, I have a question. As you talk about all the dwelling units that potentially could be added in some of the different areas, is there another part of the comprehensive plan that will be able to address the character of that, of those new dwelling units, so that we get something that's maybe not a slick tower that won't fit with Louisville, but some other standards that we could give direction to our land use code to incorporate. I am in support of the density that is being proposed in the different areas. I think density and housing density supports commercial density, supports people being able to walk to them if you are thoughtful about where that density occurs. And I am comfortable with the areas that have been identified in the comprehensive plan update. And I think that we're headed in the right direction to increase number of users through density that supports increased transit frequency. I am a user of the Dash and the 228 buses, and we're on half-hour frequencies, whenever that bus is running. And that really needs to change to get people out of their cars and using transit. And I'm hearing references to overloading the rec center and the library. And I think we also need to ask questions about where is that overloading coming from? It's not necessarily more residents and density in Louisville. Superior and Lafayette are also using those facilities, and we know that Superior is going through a lot of growth right now. So those were my comments. Thank you for listening.
Thank you very much, and thank you for alerting us to the door situation. That has been addressed. Okay, Ms. Klein, welcome up. Just to confirm name and that you live here.
Yeah, my name is Julia Klein. I live in Louisville. I've lived in Boulder or Louisville for the past 10 years. And I just wanted to start by thanking the city officials who've done such a thorough job putting together a report and soliciting community involvement. I really appreciate that. I am a huge proponent of scenario C, maybe the first I've heard tonight. I think that it will help with inclusivity, it'll increase the economic vibrancy, it'll allow for more efficient public transportation. In the end, it'll be more sustainable as a whole. So I also wanted to mention to people, as people have noted, that this increases the development of empty and largely underutilized commercial space. It's not changing the core character of a single-family residential homes. So for that reason, I think that it won't have a huge change to the community character. It will allow for, hopefully, affordable housing or more affordable housing options than currently exist, and will allow for increasing the population density and given that we have an aging community. So I just wanted to specifically advocate for a few things to keep in mind if we go forwards with this. I think Councillor Choi touched on keeping some connectivity between the various spaces that are being developed. I am in favor of having mixed-use paths connecting any of these new developments with existing developments or interconnecting all the existing developments, and increasing bus routes and bus stops and frequency of bus routes. Also to increase pedestrian underpasses or to have pedestrian underpasses, potentially on the northeast corner along South Boulder Road and the west side along McCaslin. I am a big proponent of mixed-use zoning. I think that allows for a lot of vibrancy, that allows for increasing residential development, while at the same time having a vibrant area that doesn't die at night, or that allows for shops and allows for people to buy things, to eat, for more residential opportunity close to where they live. One thing I noticed for the proposition for Red Tail Ridge that is less mixed-use zoning, I would advocate for continuing mixed-use zoning, maybe sprinkle in some industrial zoning opportunities. And my last time, I just have one question. So my understanding is that if implemented, the comprehensive plan makes it easier for a developer to apply to change the zoning if they want to develop an area. What can be done about the central areas? Like, you wouldn't want to take an existing residential property and change the zoning without the owner's consent. That was just a question. Thank you.
Great, thank you very much. Appreciate your time. Jumping online.
Yep.
Ms. Smith, we are going to.
So Ms. Smith is unmuted on our end, so she can unmute.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Great. I just wanted to share with the Planning Commission my reactions to what I've seen so far. And my understanding is that we're looking at tripling or quadrupling the number of residents in Louisville in a relatively short period of time under scenario C, which is one that when I think about what it is I love about Louisville, I don't see how we retain our small town charm at that size. I also am thinking about, what do you need if we suddenly become a city of 60 or 80,000 people? And I have to say, I think that we need to be looking at expanding the library. I think maybe we need branches of the library. I don't think that the downtown area, the rec center, can service a community of that size. So what I am in favor of is orderly growth in a digestible quantity. And I'm looking at the quantity here and just, I'm frankly quite shocked. You guys seem comfortable with it, which surprises me. I feel like traffic is already a problem, and we know from the Red Tail Ridge development that the US 36 interchange is going to fail. So I don't see that we're in a place to maintain the quality of life that we have and expand in the ways that are being discussed. In addition, when it comes to affordable housing, I think that's a nut we just haven't cracked as a city. We haven't come up with a way of making any meaningful increase in the affordable housing. And I think we're conflating the idea of growth with affordable housing and assuming that any new housing that we build is going to add to our affordable housing stock. And I submit that that's actually probably not true. That what we're going to see is a lot of homes that are very, very expensive by current standards. And I would like to see the city address affordable housing. I think all of the municipalities in the county are struggling with affordable housing right now. But I don't think that this plan does anything to address that problem. I feel like people in the past had a vision for the city that's really different. And I think that the fact that we have some of the wonderful open spaces that we have, like Davidson Mesa, reflects that there was planners who placed value on wildlife, on biodiversity, on the benefits to humans of having open space. And I'm sad to say I just don't see that anymore. But if we're going to develop the city in a way that I think preserves what people enjoy about the city, we have to come up with a way that creates open spaces that are comparable. Otherwise, we're going to have the existing open spaces, I don't think can take the pressure of an additional 60 to 80,000 people.
Ms. Smith,
And-
sorry to interrupt, but your 3 minutes are up. If you have a closing comment.
Okay, I would like to make a closing comment, but in the past when I've done this, there's been a timer, and tonight there isn't a timer.
There was one running here in the room. I'm not sure how.
Yeah, it ran out. So I apologize. We're oftentimes we'll have a timer online to keep track of time. We're keeping track in the room here, and so there was a full 3 minutes that we counted here in the room.
Okay, so my final request is that you and the consultants work to address the ways in which we're going to maintain the character of our already built communities. With the pop and scrape phenomenon, there are a lot of residential neighborhoods that are really changing, and there are ways to address that. Thank you for the opportunity to comment.
Thank you very much. And then online, we have somebody, we tell them they're going to be up next. And then Mr. Bossert, if you're available, you can come on up now. We just warn the people online.
Okay, so next, after this next speaker will be Alex Burnett on deck.
Great, thanks.
Awesome. My name is Jason Bossert. I'm a Louisville resident and have lived in Louisville or Boulder for the last 10 years. I'd like to reiterate a lot of the points that have already been made, especially towards environmental sustainability, where development's coming. We don't need to develop all of the land we have, which I think has been relatively well represented in a lot of the options presented tonight. I think additionally, making sure that there is allocations for an increase in city services, so libraries, schools, rec centers, these are all things that can be additionally developed or have some space devoted to in a development plan, which again, one of the building categories was sort of civic infrastructure. So I'd like to make sure that that's not completely ignored. I think, like I said, I think development is coming. We are going to be building more stuff. That is the direction we're headed. And with that, whether you like it or not, there is going to be character in all of the places where there is infrastructure that is built. Character and a culture will develop no matter what. And we need to make sure that we choose what kind of character we want in those areas. And I think a lot of the unique aspects of Louisville and a lot of that small town feel that has a lot of personality is because just geographically it is a relatively small town. And the residents that are here feel a lot of ownership over the town and over the various areas within the town. And I feel like that sense of ownership really helps promote a strong and vibrant culture. And then when you combine that ownership and the geographic locality of everyone with businesses, and those start to have a nice interplay, is where you get the real vibrant culture that I think everyone really values here. And so I would certainly advocate strongly for Plan C, trying to centralize a lot of development and create some cores where there's people that can live, have ownership over the area, and still have businesses where we can get that interplay between residents that have ownership, they feel like there's space that is for them, and then the businesses that can support those people. And that is all I had. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Appreciate you coming out. We have somebody online, and then Ms. Bedell, you'll be on deck.
Hello, my name is Alex Bernat. I've been a resident growing up and living here for the last 30 years, and I'm also present as a member of the Food Security Network for Boulder and Broomfield counties. Really grateful for the chance to speak, for the attention and patience and generosity that you are all putting forward in making this hearing available. And really want to second so many of the voices that have spoken to the fact that with change naturally coming with time, and with very clear goals for an increase in equity and affordability and sustainability, that we're needing to look at some bolder options, things included in some of the examples given within scenarios B and C. And I would love to add a couple other points of focus. The Food Security Network has identified that for communities in this area, one of the main barriers to food access is transportation and mobility services. And so really want to plant a seed of a lot of attention in this conversation on food access, which definitely intersects with the affordability of housing as well. So, I mean, the budget that goes towards rent also goes towards what you're eating for the month. And making sure that there is food access available on robust public transit lines and or robust public transit created to places of affordable food access. And if my understanding is correct, also currently Louisville has a affordable housing law that requires new development to have a percentage of affordable housing. However, my understanding is also that developers can buy out of that obligation. And I believe that if we're really wanting to be committed to there actually being affordable housing that is developed, that buyout option needs to be removed or significantly adjusted before this new development begins, so that there is actually, when soil gets broken, there's actually affordable housing that we know is going to be available for the community. Very thankful again for the time, and hoping that you all are getting a lot of good feedback that's really helpful for the process.
Thank you very much. Appreciate you participating in that. Let's see, next up, Ms. Bedell, and then Ms. Krantz online. You're on deck. And anybody else who's participating online, if you are wanting to participate, please do make sure you do raise hand function. Thanks. Go ahead.
Okay. Hi, I'm Cindy Bedell. I live in Ward 2 in Louisville. And I just want to say it's interesting to hear everyone's comments, but the purpose of the comp plan is for the residents to create a vision for their community, what they want to see. And I believe, and many people believe, quality of life of the current residents is the number one, should be the number one planning consideration. And I don't know if you read the online things like 00 or 80027, but you're already starting to see a lot of competition for resources. People arguing about whether seniors or families should have priority for the lap lanes at the rec center. People arguing about dogs, pedestrians versus dog walker. You know, it's really starting. So the more congestion we pack in, the more these kind of big city problems are going to come to us. If you look at the housing unit growth scenarios we were given, 65% of people who answered that wanted none of those options. 40% said none of those options. 25% chose the possible lowest growth they could come up with. So that of 25%, so total 65%. And I love the fantasy of transit-oriented communities, but it's kind of a fantasy. RTD is short a couple hundred drivers. They do not have the capacity to meet an increased need, much less the need that they currently have. I tried to take the bus back from the airport this summer. There was a long, long line. People had to wait another hour to catch the next bus. This live work is another one of these fantasies. Over all this time, it's been a pretty stable statistic, 10% live work. So people live in Louisville for a lot of reasons. I hear a lot of people say they came here to escape Boulder because they like our smaller town quality of life. And I don't think this live work fantasy is really valid either. I also want to just mention on affordable housing, we all want affordable housing, and one way to do it is to try to preserve what we already have. So we've lost a lot of affordable housing, say East Street, where we tore down smaller, more affordable units and put up 1,100,000 townhouses. So let's not confuse attached with affordable. And someone said to me the other day, well, if this is about affordable housing, then just add nothing but affordable housing until we get to our 12% goal. Finally, I wanted to comment that the 4 and 5 stories that are being talked about, I don't think they're consistent with Louisville, and I would hate to see that rezoning happen. So I think that's everything I wanted to say. Oh, ADUs. I don't think we're going to see as many ADUs as is expected, because I don't know who's going to spend $100,000, $200,000 to put an ADU in their backyard, which is probably going to go to short-term VRBOs or something like that. So, okay, thank you.
Thank you very much.
Okay, so Ms. Krantz, we've unmuted you on our end.
This is Tamar Krantz. I live in Ward 3. Mike Putney is online to share time with me. I just don't do well when I'm under pressure, so I probably will only take my 3 minutes. But I wanted to confirm that that would be okay if I spoke more slowly.
Sure, yeah.
Thank you. I heard Commissioner Hunt and Commissioner Choi saying, and others saying, change is coming, and there's nothing we can do about it. Change is coming, and we want to be intentional about that change. But I disagree a little bit that I'm not sure if this is what they meant, but that the implication of that is that things are just going to happen willy-nilly if we don't select Plan B or Plan C, which are the higher growth scenarios. We do have zoning laws, and our current zoning is going to prevent high growth with that plan. I think the change is coming. Change, I fear, comes climate change. And I've heard a lot. One of the big asks is that in the survey was online and the survey was on the you asked people, what strategies do you think are going to help improve sustainability in Louisville? The answer to those
Ooh, looks like that was on our end.
Yeah, that was on our end.
Jeff Hurt, and I
Recording in
apologize if I'm
progress.
saying this in public, but I may be
Tamar?
just waiting for an answer. But I would love to see that. I'd love to see the answers. What did the public say? What strategies did they want to see to improve sustainability? My other thing is that I really feel that you blew past the public response to the survey much too fast. I mean, I should say maybe the consultant did in presenting it. I wanted to remind you that most of the largest percentage of people, 25%, selected scenario A, which is the lower growth scenario. And then 40% selected other. I really don't think it's fair to say that the 40% selected other because they wanted a combination of A, B, and C. I, for one, put in some comments that didn't make it into the public comment summary. So I'd really like to see what everybody said who asked for another scenario. Listening to everybody speak tonight, I feel like we're coming up with it. And I think the commissioners are as well. I mean, you guys are putting together new land use maps based on these growth scenarios. And everybody's saying, well, we want to have, we want growth if we have the infrastructure in place, if we have the affordability and the sustainability, and we have the transit stops. The way that these new land use map recommendations are written, they're saying add 4 stories, add 5 stories in some areas, add, up to 5,800 new housing units, but they're not coupling that with open space and the other things that we need to make it a livable community. So I guess my strongest comment I want to make, and I just really want to emphasize this, please listen to the public. Go back to the survey and don't do what you did with the values and have planning commission and city council massage to the values and get what they want. Really look at what people said. Look at the data and not just the summary that the consultant put in and the keywords. Read the data, because I'm seeing something different in the survey results. And let me, I'm just trying to think if there's one more thing I really wanted to say. I kind of wanted to add on a much more positive note. I really think that we're hearing that people do, and the consultant got this right, people do want to preserve the small town character. And I really appreciate what Commissioner Moline said and the others who brought that up, that we shouldn't just focus on those 4 what you're calling opportunity areas. Adding ADUs and making this a comprehensive plan focused on all areas would be great. So please publish all of the results of the survey, share them with the public, and don't move forward with these land use recommendations. And if you do, please promise us that you're going to couple them with the kind of things that everybody really wants to see that are going to preserve our character and our infrastructure. Thanks so much.
Thank you. To me, at this point, then it looks like we don't have any other public comment.
Did that sound okay?
Yeah. Whoops. So,
Well, you guys are so heard.
Can you mute?
Oh.
Here we go.
I'm working on it.
Okay. Whoops. We'll just try to.
I'm getting there. I don't. Sorry.
All right. Actually, I'd like to take a 5-minute break right now. All of us here. Thanks.
Recording in progress.
Reconvene, and if we can ask Jessica, or I'm not sure who at that end wants to run with some thoughts at this point. Oh, hello. There we go. We can see you. Hi. So we've covered all the public comment at this end. Yeah, we are. Yeah. We just wanted to check in with you all. Maybe some of your reactions to some of the public comment initially, if you had thoughts that you wanted to share with us, or. Oh, yeah. Can you hear us?
Sorry, we weren't sure if that was directed to us.
Yeah.
But
Yeah. Thanks. Yeah. So if you had any thoughts, reactions you want to share with us.
I think, one of the things that's really important is we're at a little bit of the sausage making time frame, if you will. And so the comments are really appropriate, really well received, and I think actually consistent with what we heard through the community engagement process in November and into December, that there's not one scenario that specifically exactly matches what the community wants to see, that it is a combination, and there needs to be really thoughtfulness about how we integrate different considerations related to equity, affordability, resilience, climate change, safety in terms of transportation, connectivity, access to services, things like that. So I think really consistent with what we expected to hear and what we heard through the previous engagement process. So I think that would be an initial comment. And then I think we're hopeful that we can turn to Planning Commission to get some direction on some of the more detailed pieces of where you might want to talk through the future land use categories, or what you might want to see in some of the specific areas that were identified within the scenarios.
Great, thanks. Commissioner Moline?
Yeah, I maybe, I appreciate that. I have maybe one question for you. We got a little bit of public comment there about this notion that people wanted something else, something other, and that there were a lot of kind of outstanding comments that didn't make it into materials. And I'm just wondering, you were, just a minute ago, you were sort of saying, those comments, or what I'm taking from it is that even those comments, you've incorporated those into the scenario planning and that kind of work. I don't know, anything that you'd like to add to that, or how would you respond to that high number of people that said they wanted something other?
Yeah, and again, I think that it's consistent with what we heard at both the open house and in the online survey of, it's not one thing, it is a little bit from each of the scenarios, and then maybe some additional items as well.
Okay.
Wanted to maybe highlight just kind of formatting wise and what's available. So on the engagelouisvilleco.org website, which is the city's communication platform, there is a section for the comp plan and a portion that says on important documents. The community engagement summary that was in your packet tonight is there, as well as the longer appendix that has the verbatim comments that we've read, reviewed. Staff has done that as well. And those were incorporated into the community engagement summary. So want to make sure that everyone knows that everything was read and it went into the overall summary report that is in your packet, and all the verbatim comments are available on the website.
Outstanding. Thank you very much.
Thanks. Yeah. Additional discussion on behalf of Commission.
Could they put the questions back up that we were supposed to be answering?
Thanks. Yes.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah, and I guess I had a question as to, I clearly understand question 3. I could use some clarity on question 2, please.
So when we went through the presentation and we looked at each of those 4 different areas, we put future land use approach as kind of where the direction that we're headed. And so these 3 scenarios and a little bit of your scenario discussion really should inform the FLUME, the future land use map. And then we highlighted kind of our takeaways of how we're thinking of heading in the direction for this future land use map. And we just want to hear from you, knowing that this is the next big step for us. What of tonight's discussion, what of we've shared, what of the community comments should really drive that future land use map, and then what should not be considered? So really learning from you, kind of based on, yes, this future land use approach for these areas and other comments and feedback, what do you hope to see is incorporated? And then that second question is really a partner to that, because the future land use map is the map, and the land use classifications help to describe what the different colors on the map mean. So they get a little bit more detailed to help clarify what that map means. And so these 2 questions, 2 and 3, are really looking to you to help guide us on what you would hope that map starts to look like.
Okay, thank you. Could you go back to the definitions slide that shows the different?
Yep, this one?
Yes, thank you.
Yeah.
And this is all also in the table on page 7 of the packets.
Now, when some of the public feedback was quite concerned about the 4 to 5 story scenarios, is it fair to say that in the open houses, etc., there wasn't a great deal of specificity around stories? I recall seeing pictures, and I think, descriptors, but was it as specific as detailing potential stories in a construction?
I don't think that it was that specific in the open house, and I think that the key takeaway that I think our team took from all the engagement that we've had and just an understanding of what's going on is that 4 or 5 stories would be anticipated in limited locations, particularly the 5 stories. That's really anticipated more for the area for the CU parcels, and kind of anticipating CU is going to do significant development there, and that you don't want a 2-story building necessarily right next to a 5-story building. That's a little bit out of character. And so wanting to have that feathering down, again, particularly in that McCaslin area, to make sure that that the development just looks consistent and still feels really comfortable. Yeah.
And I'll add to that this land use type, this is on page 14 of the community engagement summary. The mixed use high density residential did have an image that went up to 5 stories, and 51% felt that this is just right, or they want to see more. 51% would like to see more of this. 10% of the community or responses that we received were about just right, and about 38% was less of this mixed use high density residential.
Okay, thanks. And I think similarly along those lines, there were other land use classifications like office, for example, where I think the consensus was we already have enough and or we don't need more, correct?
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, that's right.
So I guess that would be my stab at answering your first question in the other slide, is are we obligated to find a home for every one of these land use categories, or are we attempting to shortlist a subset of these land use categories?
So I think that you need to think a little bit about what do you have as an existing pattern that you want to maintain? And so is there an area of office that works well, feels comfortable, you really wouldn't want to change that in the future? Or is there areas where it's office, it's working okay, but maybe it's an opportunity to introduce the idea of mixed use? And that will inform us on what we do with the future land use map. But I think based off of the feedback that we've heard through the community engagement process, we're not anticipating that we would identify office as a significant land use in the future land use map, because there's not a lot of support for it. It's maybe maintain what you have, but it's not adding any new.
Can I just add, I think it might be helpful as we have this discussion about question 2 to be looking at the table 1 in your memo, the FLUM recommendations, FLUM. Because I think those are those, if I understand it correctly, those are what you want us to sort of look at and say, do we think this is in the right direction? Is that right?
Yeah, that's right. An example is office, right? That land use category is going to be mostly offices, and we've identified it's potentially three, maybe 4 stories.
Actually, I'm sorry. I think you're misunderstanding my question. I think on question 2, aren't we talking about the FLUM, the opportunity area future land use map? And that would be looking at South Boulder Road, downtown Louisville, McCaslin Corridor, the table 1 in your memo. Could you pull that up?
Table 1.
Yeah, give me just a second because it's not in the presentation. So
sorry.
Oh, it's okay.
It should be it's in the packet. I think it's in the cover memo. It's the same thing as what's in your memo, yeah.
It's on page 3 of the cover memo, the staff memo. I'm just trying to get us to the right place here. I feel like it's a little confusing trying to look at the land use types and the FLUM.
It's also in the design workshop. It's the same thing as what's in the design workshop memo on page 5 of that memo. It's just 2 places.
Is this the table, or I didn't go far enough up, sorry.
It's this one.
This one.
Is that the one that you want us to answer question 2? Is the do we think these recommendations are good? Is that what you're asking?
Yes.
Okay.
And it relates to that the future land use classification. So in the example of office, are there any areas here that are appropriate for office? And you really want to make sure, or it's, you know what, we really like this direction, but we would want to see maybe more commercial or more intense mixed use. Using that future land use category list is helpful for us in answering that question number 2.
I just want to add a little bit too. You know, this is a land use map. It's not regulatory.
Right.
So these are all give or takes type things. You know, when you're looking there, it's just kind of proportionality. Do you want to see more or less of this? And then I think the question that they're trying to get at on those land use categories, we want to make sure that the way they're described, you're comfortable with. So that other table that actually had like high density mixed use residential, 4 to 5, like, are you comfortable with the way we're describing those? Do you want us to change any of those descriptions, add, delete descriptions, et cetera?
I mean, I guess my initial reaction to that question is kind of almost by definition that they seem to be fairly accurate. If there's something that if anybody has any strong reactions to some of that language, welcome that discussion. But
my only comment on that is that this whole time that we've been talking about this, I have had a difficulty getting out of my head the images of watching some of my kids play their video games where, you know, they're developing these medieval towns, and they drop a farm next to a tavern, and it's like there's this overlay of green and red where one makes somebody happy and one makes somebody sad, right? And I'm thinking about all of these things, and how in that game that's nice because they show these digital overlays of these adjacencies and interactions. And the way that we've looked at this future land use map, you know, they're very, very discrete lines, right, that say this thing that we're talking about stops right here, when, you know, there's something on the other side of that street, but there's not really a consideration about it. And so I have a little bit of a difficulty thinking about the definition of, you know, a mixed-use office or something when we're talking about it in this location, when we're not going to say, hey, here's, you know, potentially what happens right across the street.
So yeah, and I think we anticipate that a little bit. Like if you take the McCaslin corridor, and I think maybe Jessica was talking to that a little bit about how do you transition between land uses. And again, this is more of a blunt, here's the bigger picture, but I think we're trying to say, yeah, like if you say you want some, you know, commercial land uses, we're not going to say, okay, we want 4 stories right adjacent to single family residential. That's never going to fly, right? So we're going to have design standards within that realm. But I think the fundamental question is, take the McCaslin corridor, like starting there, are you okay with limited 4 and maybe 5-story development if it's limited and it's adjacent to US 36? And we can talk more about exactly where that could go. See, when we get a future land use map, it may or may not call out very specific parcels. It might just say within this general area, we want some proportion of this. And then it could say, in no circumstance will we have this within 1,000 feet of a residential area, you know, something like that.
And I think it's to that point, right, of thinking about, okay, if we take this area and proportionately it's broken down with this category and this category and this category, I think that's a great way to conceptualize what the potential future situation or condition may be, right? Because we don't know whatever is going to happen. But I think one of the things that, you know, you asked the question, or the question was asked, are the definitions right, or should they be tweaked or added or reduced? I think one of the things that gets that whole idea of adjacencies and interactions, especially between the different areas or with the different categories of use types that would be there, one thing that still is missing for me kind of across the board is looking at what happens when you do cross that dotted line, right? And so, for example, industrial, you know, we potentially could enhance that definition of what the industrial would mean to include something that said, you know, has a higher likelihood of you know, freight vehicular traffic than light residential, which again just kind of gives a little bit more context to what happens when you cross that dotted line, right? Or you know, office, right, has the potential to increase vehicular traffic between 8 a.m. and 5 p.m. That type of thing, right? And that just, at least from my perspective, and I'm not a planner by experience or trade, right? From me, that gives a little bit more definition to what the proportional makeup of those areas means when you look at it from, again, those interactions and adjacencies.
I guess I'm not as hung up as trying to draw the kind of that kind of going into that level of detail for this type of a document as to how that would impact. It's something to be aware of, right? When you stare at that and you look at office, well, that's a natural thing to think about. Makes sense to me, but I don't know if it's typically included in this type of a document. I don't know what other people think as far as whether it's trying to, I mean, I appreciate, being concerned about adjacencies, but nothing in this document is going to require that a 5-story building be built next to single-family homes.
Right.
So, are you looking for more, so just like how many different areas would you want to take into consideration for these definitions of?
I don't know, and maybe that's part of why I'm struggling a little bit. You know, when I think of it, it's just I'm trying to reconcile, you know, all of the effort that's gone into this, all of the definition and description, all of the comment and the sentiment from everybody from council to residents to everybody in between, and I think, especially people who are more comfortable with, you know, this type of document or a community planning process, you know, it's easy to forget what it's like not to know the material, and to be able to make it a digestible and usable document for everybody, you know, across the citizenry as well. I think there are opportunities to try to provide a little bit more information to weave the story together, right?
To sort of, if I could, Commissioner Choi, so you're saying so you're saying add some more context to these different land use categories to give people a better sense of, you know, mixed use retail. Well, what that's going to mean is beyond that it's, you know, 3 to 4 story buildings and stuff, but it's going to mean this level of like traffic or.
Maybe it's even better to think about it from the context of, you know, here's the character, right? And here's what it gives and here's what it takes. You know, for example, medium density residential, right? Here's the definition, the character or the description of what that means that we have. Here's what it gives, you know, and this would be something that comes from obviously like a large data set, right? That says medium density residential, you know, generally adds this many expected dollars of revenue per additional person, or you know, like this is like when you have this many residents, generally you'll have another library branch, or you know, that type of thing. Again, I'm thinking about the interfaces, right? And not necessarily just physical interactions and adjacencies.
So this gets brought up a lot, right? Like what are the causes and effects that we're dealing with here? How does the city maintain and sustain fiscal balance with development? And these are always good questions. You know, there's a lot of information that are in the background here. We've hired economic and planning systems to do a study. There's things in that study that speak to some of this. You know, there's fiscal analysis you can do. I'm not recommending we do like a really strict fiscal analysis because there's a lot of soft thought, you know, there's a lot of secondary impacts of development and the concept of economic vitality. So I think they're embedded in all of these recommendations. We're just not explicitly talking about them here. They're in the background documents that support this. And I think what you'll see when we get to drafting the actual plan, you know, later this winter into the spring, that we'll do our best to connect those pieces. And so hopefully that you'll see in the draft document how those things connect. I understand it's a little frustrating that some of those things might be missing here. But one of the things we could do too is you'll have to, I think you'll have to reference the background documents or be familiar with them, but maybe going through each of the 4 items and actually looking at the bullet points that the consultants wrote and seeing, like, do you agree or disagree with any of those bullet points, just to try to narrow the conversation. Are there bullet points missing that you would want to add to this level of description? I think would be helpful. This is a building block to the rest of the plan.
And you're talking about these opportunity areas, yes. Okay.
Yeah. Okay, great. I think that really frames
would help to focus
Thank
things.
you. Yeah, that'll focus us quite a bit.
And to add, I think maybe one thing that's missing, at least in this exercise, and this gets back towards, you know, the scenarios that were discussed and the question I asked about distribution of where. Okay, so I think we could go through this and talk about what yes, okay, it makes sense to do this sort of thing there. But I think a part of what is missing, at least in this exercise and in this table, is, okay, what's the relative weighting? Because we talk a lot about, this different scenarios and trying to preserve our small town character. The impact that development will have in each of those areas is different in how it will affect the small town character. And touching on a lot of the comments made about connectivity and transportation, the ability and return on investment of each of those to address the things we're trying to get to is different. And I think we need to acknowledge that, and I think we need to put some input. And so, like, when we get to it, I have some strong thoughts about the McCaslin corridor, for example, and how that should be weighted relative to the others in terms of addressing the goals of this plan. So I would ask, are we adding that here? When's the appropriate time to have that conversation?
Yeah, I mean, I think that if you have those comments specifically related to one of these opportunity areas, now's a good time to do it. So maybe if you want to start and just go in order.
Let's work at start from the top.
We can bring up maps too. If you want to start to look at geographic areas, ultimately that's what we're producing out of this is a map. So we could go that route too.
So what are people's reactions directly to the 2 bullet points that have been written for the South Boulder Road opportunity area?
So I would motion that, at a high level, at 10,000 feet, those sorts of development additions would make sense for what we're trying to do. But again, referencing what I just said, I see the South Boulder Road corridor in terms of changing our character. That's probably one area where you would see the biggest change if you added too much. It's, it is the periphery, but it's also South Boulder Road's a major artery going right through the middle of Louisville, and a lot of people take it very regularly. And so if we overload that area with some of these things, you will see increases in traffic and congestion. And, I think a lot of people would say that would negatively affect our small town charm. And so I think we would want to be careful with how and where we do that. And I think we should try to capture that thought in terms of balance in the recommendations for this opportunity area.
And I do think, I take your point, if I could just add, and we've heard a lot of comments about concern about the numbers and some of these things, about the numbers of units and all that kind of stuff. And I want to make sure I understand the purpose of this. It's just, like you said, it's not regulatory. It's certainly not mandating any numbers. So I think you make a good point that we're going to want to be thinking about, I guess that's what you meant by waiting. I was not really sure what you meant by waiting when you first said it.
Sorry, like waiting, like how, I guess the balance of what goes where, and is one area more heavily added to than another. Waiting, not in like I'm waiting for a bus. I'm weighting things differently on.
No, I get that. I was just that. Thank you. That's helpful because I do think for the purposes of this, I don't think we're talking about as far as the comp plan and the kinds of uses that go in here. We're not really talking about numbers. The numbers were for scenarios, but we're not really talking about numbers for this. We're just talking about zoning potential zoning uses and changes that would go in these areas that could facilitate additions, but we're not talking about specific numbers.
Right. Yeah. Like I don't think we're going to say we want 1,000 residential units here, but if we say we want certain properties to have 3-story residential development,
right,
you can go in and probably have a range of how many units that would actually be. I would also say that both commercial development and residential development create traffic and they create demands. So at different rates, and it all depends on the density that you build those things out on. I think one of the things that we're hoping for too is we're focusing the development concepts, and the reason we talk so much about transit-oriented development in different densities is it actually supports transit and it supports people's ability to take fewer trips in cars. Mm-hmm. So it's this interesting push and pull of, yes, if you put it there, people will want to drive their cars, but also if you do it in certain ways, there will be, it's not like it's the magic pill and nobody's ever going to drive again, but if you do it in certain ways, you typically get less single occupancy vehicle trips with certain types. So that when we talk about sustainability and those connections, so sorry, I probably got a little bit off track there, but to your question about the numbers, there will be numbers behind it, and as we flush the plan out, we can talk about ranges of numbers that could result. If you say, hey, we want to allow 3 to 4 story development here on maybe on half of the vacant properties, what would that actually look like? And we can have those discussions.
Yeah, we should probably do that. But and of course, the big wild card in all this that we can't control is as somebody pointed out, RTD.
We can't control RTD, and we
Well,
can't
RTD.
control the market. Like whatever we say should be there and whatever we zone it as
Right.
doesn't mean it'll happen if the market's not there also. So that's an underlying theme.
Yeah, I guess actually I'm going to throw in one thing to try to get a focus a little bit more. Like my reaction would be mixed use with residential by right. I'm curious as to how that got woven in here as a direct feedback to what's been written.
Right, so some of the feedback we've been getting, I would say too, is that if we, and this comes from the housing plan, is that the way our zoning code is structured and, you know, there is no by right residential on the South Boulder Road corridor. It just doesn't exist. It's a barrier. So if we actually want some level of residential development, one tool is to make it by right. It's much more likely that we'll have private investment by doing that.
Interesting.
Okay, thanks, Commissioner.
I was just going to say I am in support of the 2 bullets there for South Boulder Road, and I'm glad the Opportunity Area 1 map is up on the screen because it's reminding me that one of the things that I think this area and that I live near is that it sounded like people wanted to see housing and affordable housing and those kinds of things in this area, and this is actually sort of becoming a core for that with Kestrel, with Balfour, and those kinds of things. So I think these 2 bullets are a great addition, and I look at this area as sort of an opportunity area where, yeah, I hope we can hang on to, you know, some of the commercial that's in there. But if we have a chance to help that commercial stay by allowing some mixed use, I'm supportive. So that's my thoughts on this one.
Thanks.
Yep.
I'm also supported. I'll just shortcut things. I am fine with both of these bullet points.
Thank you.
I wanted to ask about potentially adding one bullet point, just reading through the character of the rest of the bullet points in the other areas, and knowing where this particular area is geographically, having a bullet point in there that talks about, you know, emphasizing connection and transition to the downtown Louisville focus area. You know, these loans literally do touch each other on those dotted lines. And, you know, what Commissioner Mahaley said about, you know, the potential of significantly changing the character of that South Boulder Road area with a certain amount of development. I think there's an opportunity to emphasize, you know, that connectivity and transition to the downtown Louisville area just by emphasizing the fact that, yes, they're 2 separate, but they're connected.
I hear you, Commissioner Choi. The one thing I notice in this little opportunity area is the amount of pedestrian traffic, and I guess I'm hopeful that, again, with Kestrel, Balfour, and maybe additional housing, I think that helps generate some traffic potentially for the commercial that remains and maybe comes to that area too. So.
Yeah, and that's what I'm really thinking about, right? Is how you emphasize that connectivity and that transition,
right?
Because you have people on bikes and pedestrians right now who have a hard time getting across South Boulder.
Yeah.
But you also have the opportunity, right, for connecting, as Director Zaccaro said, right, connecting by vehicular traffic in the right way, you know, between those 2. So, and without getting too much in the weeds, right? Just saying, hey, you know, kind of emphasize that connectivity and that transition.
Yeah, I completely agree. And so, like, so what I think I heard you say is like a 3rd bullet point emphasizing connectivity. You know, I don't know what's classified as, you know, non-car, but pedestrian or other, you know, alternative transport between this opportunity area and the downtown area. Yeah, because, you know, in terms of, you know, the traffic, there really isn't much, right, in terms of pedestrian traffic currently, and that's something I think that we're in agreement wanting to address.
Right, there's not a lot currently, but there could be.
Yeah, and you know, and I agree with that, and I agree with the first 2 bullet points. But you know, I think it's worth having somewhere in, you know, in the plan, at least an acknowledgement that depending on how that is implemented, those different land uses there. I mean, I think the 30 pounds of flour in a 10-pound bag comment is most applicable to this opportunity area, just based on how it's currently developed in terms of traffic. And so, some form of acknowledging, the connectivity issue while mitigating traffic concerns. I think that's important to include from a growth perspective and would address a lot of concerns that I'm hearing from the community.
Does that capture?
Yeah, I think those are great comments. I don't think we're done with the comments, but we can keep going. But I am curious to see if there's consensus on adding the connectivity. I'm hearing there is.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I think so.
Great
Yep.
idea.
I wasn't sure if it was like an appropriate thing to add in this particular context, but I like the idea. So if we can add it, I would be in favor of that.
Great. Commissioner Baskett, did you have?
That's what I was going to
Oh, okay, great. All right. All right, moving on.
Great. So the next area is downtown. And so, again, the bullets that are in the memo and are on the slide, mid-density mixed-use residential up to 3 stories in some locations, infill development with residential by right. So again, to the point Rob made about making it easier to develop residential, and then creating gathering spaces for retail vibrancy.
And I would like, as you're going through, if I could ask for one very specific point of input for the commercial core downtown, not the DLO side, but the historic commercial core. Our design standards right now talk about there's a transition area, there's a core area and a transition area. Transition area is 2 stories only. Those are the areas nearest to the residential. The core area says there can be a mix of 3 and 2 story, but it doesn't say how much. I'm curious of your thoughts of that design standard. Do you like the way it's drafted now? Would you like more by right 3-story within the core? Would you be interested in allowing 3-story in the transition areas? I know it's a controversial thing, but I just want to get any very specific feedback on that.
3 stories by right freaks me out. There you have it.
All fair comments. It's just
Okay, yeah.
discussion that I think would give the consultants and staff clarity when we
Sure.
get to the next point.
And I guess my concern there too is that long-term, once you have 3 stories, the economic pressure that's placed on the single-story buildings that I think really are part of that downtown character is such that they end up getting torn down. And so that would be my concern is part of that. I'm curious what other people think.
Completely agree.
Yeah, I think this one in particular, if there's anywhere to emphasize any efforts around maintaining that small town charm, this is the one. And I know we don't have anything in here that specifically addresses through a bullet point, historic, character, charm, that type of thing. And I don't know if there's an easy way to do that while still addressing the objectives around, responsible growth and development. But I would share.
I think what I'm hearing for the historic commercial core is that our current design standards sound like they're about right.
They're good.
Okay.
Yeah.
I think so,
Which,
yeah.
there could be more discussion about that, but that's.
And even the bullet point of infill development with residential by right concerns me. I like the kind of limiting factor where it says in some locations. I don't know where those would be. That would be kind of on a place by place, right?
Yeah, you could go place by. I'm curious about the concept of maybe having commercial development but capping it within certain areas, and then maybe only allowing it on 2nd and 3rd stories so it doesn't take ground floor retail space. So we can play around with those types of concepts, but having it by right would, right now it's a special review use only in the core, again, not in DLO, but in the historic area. So if you say it's residential by right, it doesn't mean everywhere in the historic commercial area. You could put limitations on it, but still allow some by right. Yeah, and you could even say even in the 2nd and 3rd stories, it's limited to, we can come up with whatever limitation we're comfortable with. So it doesn't have to be all or nothing, I guess, in summary.
I'll just offer that I'm more open to some of these, some of this increased density on the D-Low side, I guess, since there is some development over there already. Yep.
Where, of course, there will be a train, right?
I'm hoping. Anyways, any other reactions to the bullet points for downtown Louisville? I think this is an important one, obviously. It's all important, but
So are we suggesting the first bullet point is 2-story? Because it sounds like we're a bit uncomfortable with 3 stories in particular areas downtown. Maybe not all of downtown, but how are we suggesting we amend or rather revise that first bullet point?
I didn't think we were going to amend that one. I think we were looking at the infill development one to maybe put a little more detail on that one.
Are you talking about the second under community, I'm sorry, I was looking at the top one, future land use approach. Yeah, I mean, I think it might be appropriate to separate the historic commercial from D-Low and maybe have a different bullet point for each one. And so kind of what I'm hearing is continue to promote really what we already have, which is 3-story mixed use in D-Low. And then that the design standards in the commercial historic part of downtown from a height standpoint seem okay is what I'm hearing. What I'm not sure on is there some consensus to change the residential, maybe not by right everywhere, but explore some concepts of allowing more residential in the commercial core. And even if you say, let's look at it tonight, it doesn't mean it's going to be that way, but we could look, I mean, I'm more curious about, do you want us to look at that or play around with some policy language?
oh, please, Commissioner Basket.
Rob, I appreciate what you just said. If we want to have a vibrant city, we need it to be a work-live city, 24/7 kind of atmosphere. So I think we should have some words in there about getting housing into the historic downtown core. We have it at the edges. And I think those people create a lot of vitality walking into town for coffee or whatever they're doing, or having kids walk to school at LMS, stuff like that. So I don't think it's that out of character to get some residential mixed in the historic core.
So when you say 24/7, I'm flashing images of New York City. I don't
I was trying to think about how it feels in Lafayette, where I don't think they have housing in their commercial core, do they? But they've certainly got it within a block.
Yeah.
A block. Well, there is, yeah, there is
also,
some residential that is actually on South Public, but it's kind of near the south end.
Yeah.
I think when you say 24/7 in the context of Louisville and Lafayette, we're talking like they roll the sidewalks up at 9 still. I mean, it's not it's not like we're going New York City.
Well, that's an important
24/7.
distinction.
It is an important distinction.
Because
We're not looking
roll
at
of
bars.
sidewalks up at night is not 24/7.
It's not 24/7, but it is. I think I think what Commissioner Baskett's saying is that just the vibrancy on a more ongoing basis, rather than just Saturday afternoons. Like it's
Actually, Director Zakara, can you define the historic area that would be, right, we're talking Main Street, Front Street?
Right, yeah, so it's basically the, it's Main Street for about 4 blocks from the museum down to Crystal Springs.
Yep.
That's and then it's Front Street kind of around Steinbach, from Pine up to where you hit the residential area, South Street. So Pine, front from Pine to South.
So so you feel that residential within those relatively limited areas is important?
I think it would add to the vibrancy to have people living in those areas.
I agree, and I also, though, I understand the concern about taking away, retail or commercial space. So I would be in favor of looking at options of mixing in that residential while preserving the ground floor commercial space.
Yeah, well, okay. With that, that's a whole different thing. That's important then.
So maybe the bullet is something about preserve ground floor retail while adding residential opportunities.
In some locations.
In some locations.
Yeah.
Steve likes that language.
Yeah. Commissioner, was there hands up down there? No? All right.
You moved to 3?
Yeah, and if you look at the 2 bullet points in the actual table, those are pretty explicitly what you just said. First one, maintain ground floor retail and other street level active uses in commercial area and propose medium density residential in some locations, including above ground floor retail.
Perfect.
Yeah, so it's pretty good. And with the distinction that considered 3 stories in some locations, I think we're talking about retaining the design standard in the historic core, but allowing 3 elsewhere like D-Lo.
Yeah.
So I think it's close per what Commissioner Choi just said, but adding the distinction between, the historic downtown versus elsewhere.
But we do allow some 3-story, in
The current design standards would allow
Yeah.
some 3-story.
Right. in the commercial
And it's
historic core.
Yeah, it's discretionary through the PUD process right now.
Okay.
I think that's reasonable.
Yeah. All right. All right, moving on.
That is clear, thank you. So third area is the McCaslin corridor. This is the area where there's potential for rezoning away from office on Centennial and looking more at the mid-density residential uses there. And then a higher density for potentially 5 stories in some locations along 36 and increasing those connections overall.
So I personally think those are great. I would want to have another emphasis put in there that just talks about, again, that transition from, because when we say, along 36 or near 36, that's a kind of subjective definition. And just emphasizing, again, almost to assuage any concerns, right, that we're talking about essentially a transition period or transition area, that would go from that potential 4 or 5 stories, near 36 to the single family homes that one could argue are still near 36. And just doing something in there to say, yeah, we're not going to, to your point, Director Zakara, we're not going to put a 5-story building next to a single family lot, right?
Some language to temper that. Yeah, that makes sense to me. I guess from the urban planning perspective and the thought of changing it from office to residential, I'm concerned that we'd end up with just kind of little postage stamps randomly scattered throughout that area of residential. And I don't know that works well necessarily. I mean, I guess there's a case that could be made for it, but I am curious as to how that might play out.
The bullet point does talk about mid-density residential
Yeah.
as a transition from the current zoning of office, which I think, does that,
No, so my concern is, right, there's a handful of lots that are empty out there right now. So it gets flipped potentially to residential, and then we just have this, right, we're aware of the lofts that are out there right now. So we just have, imagine a handful of those just kind of scattered in random locations throughout there. I'm not sure if that's a great goal. I think residential is somehow, but yeah.
And so I think that lends itself well to, adding, and I think it's even in the table, not on the slide there, but talked about mixed use residential. And so it doesn't become just like a different series of, higher density buildings. If you sprinkle some mixed use residential in there, I've talked about this before at previous, sessions where, that's one way to combat the thought of, the feeling of sprawl, having a variety of different housing types. And I think that would also, so that not only do I think that could be used to address your concern, but I think we could also implement mixed-use residential as a way to also provide sort of a gradient between, some of the single-family area neighborhoods that are currently abutting this area, and what's expected to be some higher density areas. You could add some mixed residential to help implement more of a gradient and more of a connective feel to the neighborhood.
But I guess my concern is that the mixed use portion, the commercial portion of mixed use, that requires direct access to McCaslin and visibility from McCaslin for the commercial spaces to succeed.
Not mixed use. I think there was a category. Can we go to the slide that showed the different categories? I think it was called mixed residential. Maybe I'm misnaming it. Yeah, is it the mixed? I thought yeah.
I think it's the mid-density residential mixed use.
Yeah,
where
that one.
Some office and retail allowed.
And so what I'm talking about, I guess, maybe isn't here, sort of, and maybe it's a combination of these things, but combining in these undeveloped lots, and there are some examples in our surrounding areas where you have a development that is a mixture of townhome rows, single-family homes, more of the smaller single-family homes. And I think we even saw this in some of the development across the train tracks here, I think 3 sessions ago. So maybe that's a different category. I'm not sure exactly what we're calling it, but I would motion that, that is, whatever we call it, having some sort of plan for a variety of residential, not just calling it mid-density, would be worthwhile.
That would be fine with me. And I for one, I'm just excited at the opportunities as someone who lives along this corridor or near this corridor. I'd love to see. I think this area has a lot of room for improvement. Maybe the most in any of the areas.
Sorry, Commissioner Basket. Yeah.
I'm wondering if what could help us in envisioning McCaslin on the west side, especially, is the idea of creating another neighborhood. I don't see neighborhood in those words up there for future land use approvals, but that feels to me like that's maybe the desire, is not just postage stamping things down, or so maybe we should articulate that, create a new McCaslin neighborhood, West McCaslin neighborhood.
To build on that a little bit, I like that a lot. To build on that, I'm almost wondering, is it worth pulling or asking the comp plan, I guess, to incorporate that grid idea concept from the small area plan that was, is that something that
Yeah, I know we don't talk a lot about transportation or that infrastructure here, but in the background, I think we're absolutely considering having more of a grid pattern back there would be better.
Yeah.
And how do you connect the CU development to other development opportunities?
Yeah.
I think this plan will need to address that with some policies.
Mm-hmm.
So those are great comments that we need to add into this.
West McCaslin neighborhood.
Yeah, I think a gridded street pattern maybe helps with that a little. So anyway.
And I do like the idea of focusing here on mid-density or higher residential, because to some of the comments about affordable housing, again, we can't necessarily control the market, but we can control the variety and size, and types of housing that goes in here that might have help to have an impact on providing, more affordable options.
Yeah.
And this is a good area, I think, to do that with the CU development coming in and being near transportation.
It is, and to both Chair's point as well as points made by some other folks, maybe even having specifically called out another bullet point that talks about, focusing or supporting infrastructure to facilitate, the West Mac neighborhood development, at the medium density or whatever it is. Like that's a good thing that, yeah.
Yeah, and I appreciate the comment, Commissioner Basket, about a new neighborhood, because I think that's really, I think if you were to put that, I think that people are pointing towards that, and I I would like to make the point, and again, this goes back to my comment on waiting. In my opinion, this opportunity area is the highest opportunity for return on investment in terms of addressing some of our goals for attainable housing and economic vitality, while also mitigating the effect on existing neighborhoods. This area, as you know, is built for way more, density and development than is currently there, right? The huge boulevards that are unused, right? And so you could add this West McCaslin neighborhood while maintaining and preserving the small town charm and the other neighborhoods. And I think you get that more there than you would anywhere else in the opportunity areas. And I think it's, and in my opinion, I think in the comp plan, I think we need to acknowledge that if others agree. And so, that's really where I've been driving with my comment on waiting is I think this is the highest opportunity area for return on investment in terms of a lot of the priority areas we've talked about.
I guess we can trademark West Mac, but I'm concerned about East McCaslin too. And we do want to think of it as the big picture because it is all one with McCaslin cutting through it. But
yeah, I completely agree.
Yeah, I'm not sure. Some thought of developing neighborhood in there, though, I think would speak well, or would help out the understanding of what it could be. Any other additional thoughts? All right.
I really like that they have the add parks and trail connections because I think this area also is particularly well suited for that.
Yeah, definitely. Commissioner Bangs, we still see a tiny little picture of you. Feel free to chime in anytime you want, though.
Okay, thank you, will do.
Excellent. All right. Opportunity area number 4.
All right. Area 4 is, Red Tail Ridge. Sorry, I got mouse issues. Red Tail Ridge is, as we talked about, really a lot of opportunity potentially here. The mid to higher density housing of 3 to 4 stories. Opportunities for continuing to see some office and industrial uses as well. And then real importance, and we heard quite a bit, transit connections, multimodal connections, green space and trails to really make this an integrated piece kind of within itself as a neighborhood, but also into the rest of Louisville.
At 9:09 p.m., we jump on Red Tail Ridge. Ouch. Oh, I'll let anybody start on this one who wants to speak to it, but
I'll throw a comment in just to get it going. The mid to high density housing thing, to 3 to 4 stories, has me concerned, and I know there's a lot of public commentary that's consistent with that. And part of it is, if we do just what is said there without some qualifiers or guidance, I don't think it'll feel like Louisville. I think it'll feel like an extension of the Broomfield corner there, the Via Vara area. And so it won't feel like Louisville. That part of town, I think they're economically more connected to Broomfield than here. And so I think we need to be careful here for a variety of reasons, goes without saying. And so, so the mid to high density part concerns me a little bit. And I know that's not novel, but just throwing it out there.
I don't know that it's the mid to high density that concerns me as much as the fact that I don't think it'll ever feel like part of Louisville. It really does feel like more of the Broomfield adjacent areas. And I just kind of rip that Band-Aid off because at times we've heard pitches by developers say, oh, we're going to weave ourselves into the community character, and it's out there.
Right.
I drive past it somewhat regularly.
Although, looking at the map, are there opportunities with the Avista moving to sort of connect with the Coal Creek Ranch neighborhood through that Avista parcel? And I think that's something we should call out. And I think it was discussed during the presentation that there are opportunities there, and I'd like to call that out specifically, that we could try to connect this piece by focusing on some sort of residential or mixed-use residential, in that parcel, in the Avista parcel.
And similarly, and I think we've seen elements of this, if there is residential, having it be walkable and in very close proximity to the Monarch area from a connectivity issue. If there were residential, and I'm not saying we should have a high level there, but if there were, you in my opinion, you would need to implement it in that fashion. So it's connected to. I love your point about Coal Creek Ranch and having it connect there, but also to the school. Because a lot of schools here in Louisville, to me, and I'm up at Coal Creek Elementary, that's a neighborhood feel school, and I know a lot of the schools here have that neighborhood feel, but Monarch doesn't have that. And I think maybe if we do have residential there, I think we could address that.
Talk to any parents who have to drive in there on a regular basis. I'll tell you that. But, and of course, there's also the conversation I hope someday we'll get to have about the other route out of Monarch. But, right. But I think there are opportunities to connect. When I lived briefly over in Coal Creek Ranch, the north, I did see kids walking. There are some. The city's done a nice job with doing some of those paths and making that more walkable for the kids. And I think there are opportunities for Red Tail Ridge to be able to connect that way as well. And it would be a really attractive area, I think, for people who want to go to Monarch.
And that is part of what has been approved by council at this point already, is that connectivity, I think, pretty clearly. But setting that aside, though, I guess one of my thoughts is somebody commented on saying that there could be 60,000 residents. I don't see that in any of this presentation, that it would grow to 60,000.
So they're referring to the new state State Bill 1313, the transit-oriented development bill, where it calls for the really high-density housing along the bus routes.
Right.
And the dash route especially goes through the majority of town. And so if you implemented it without any adjustments, it's a big number.
Right.
So we're still working with the state on how to implement that bill. I don't think anybody's thinking we're going to rezone or plan for that many with this plan.
The way I heard the comment was that this comp plan had the potential to lead to that directly. So
yeah, I think we're looking more like the housing study. We're trying to live within the realm from a residential standpoint. How do we get economic vitality? Like, employment growth hasn't been our issue in the last 10 years.
Right.
Not at all. We've doubled our employment base, while our residential base has grown, but not nearly at the same rate. But the housing plan's calling for something like 3,000, 3,500 residential units of different types. We have kind of some targets and goals, not the number of units, but the mix. But the point is we're zoned for about 400-ish.
Right.
So we'd have to make land use changes to hit our goals.
So I'm curious how the commissioners feel about that happening out here. So I think I've stated I'm not opposed to mid-high density housing potentially here, but
so this area in particular is unique insofar as it touches grazing fields, a U.S. highway, single-family lots for multi-million-dollar homes, and car dealerships. Like, literally, you can just walk to one edge of this area or the other and hit any one of those things, and a hotel, right? And I'm not sure that the bullet points appropriately capture what we do and don't want to see in that area, because I also am not necessarily opposed to high-density residential with multi-story buildings with appropriate gradients, right? I don't want to see a single-family home across the street from a car dealership. That doesn't make any more sense to me than having a 5-story building next to a single-family home on the McCaslin area, right? So, I mean, I think that there's a huge amount of opportunity, as has been discussed ad nauseum, right, with this area over the course of multiple years here. But I think that we have an opportunity with the bullet points to capture how some of those appropriate gradients should be emphasized to make those transitions between all those things.
Other commissioner thoughts on that?
I think that makes sense. I'm not sure how you word it in this particular context, but I do think it makes sense to acknowledge that. And, I do hear the concerns about Red Tail Ridge changing the nature of the community, but as you pointed out, it's sort of off on the edge, and I don't think it's going to change the feel of Old Town. I mean, they're separated enough. But I do think, so I'm not that concerned about it looking like the Broomfield corner there, because it is by 36. There are like to Colin's point, there are car dealerships there, and other big, retail kinds of uses. So I'm rambling now. I'll shut up. It's late.
One of the buzzwords in planning is context sensitive. So we could maybe throw something in there. We'll know what that means. Like if you say housing, but it has to be context sensitive, that means you don't put really high density up in the, near Coal Creek Ranch. Like you don't do that. You have to, we keep talking about feathering and transitioning, being context sensitive. So I think we could have some language in here as we advance this concept about that.
Yeah, I think that would lend well.
Commissioner Mahaley.
And also regarding the green space and trails, we've heard a number of comments about open space, and I'm familiar with a number of the debates in the past about red tail and the open space. And in the comp plan, I think it was the comp plan previous, it talked about buffer space between Louisville and other communities, and that's one of the nice things I think we've done here, in the past, is preserve those open spaces between Louisville and other, our neighbors, and so. Acknowledging that and acknowledging, the desire for retaining some of that open space, aside from just add green spaces, I think that is consistent with what a lot of the feedback I've heard so far. And so I'm not sure exactly how to do that, and how and where you'd have that buffer space or where you'd call it, but, preserving and maintaining the open nature of that area strategically to help address some of the challenges and concerns that Commissioner Choi brought up, I think would be important to add here.
Thank you. What are other thoughts in reaction to the bullet points? Both, I guess on this screen, should we bounce to the other bullet point page for?
Back to table 1.
Yeah, table 1.
Yeah.
Thanks. That's what I meant.
It seems to capture a lot of some of what we've spoken about. I guess I'd really like to see us talk or have some of the bullet points address the connection that we talked about to, what was it, Coal Creek Ranch and around the school as a way to try and sort of integrate red tail residential into that part of Louisville and the kind of school environment. I really like the thinking around that.
A comment I was going to make a little while ago is I think that Red Tail has one of the best opportunities for live work, for the jobs that will come there, for the hospital jobs, but also teachers that are at Monarch. I mean, it'd be walking distance. And since they'd be coming up kind of at the same time, perhaps, you might offer people an option that they don't have currently in town. So I don't know if I want those words in there. Maximize live-work opportunities somewhere in the report.
I do think these bullets, in the table, which have a little more meat on them than what was on the slide, are nice. And I think that some locations does a lot of work there for Steve.
Some locations.
As far as the feathering or the context specific, I think that's certainly what the some locations kind of gets at. You might want to add some of that context specific language.
Context sensitive.
Sensitive, sorry, not specific.
Yeah. I think when you see, once we start to develop this plan, we'll put more detail about how to transition, or maybe, like, we don't know yet, but it could be how to transition, or more specifically within these large areas where you might see these different uses. So we'll keep developing that, but I think we've heard those comments, and That's been our intent, I think, anyway. So now we need to figure out how to articulate it in the final plan.
All right. Anything else specifically?
No.
All right. Bouncing back to Jessica and team, or Jessica and.
I'm just gonna stay here and scroll down to just the questions, and I think just highlighting, make sure that I can see that. There we go. If you, after we leave tonight, maybe have thoughts, comments, questions on the future land use categories, I think share those with Rob and Jeff, and they'll make sure that those get to us. I think we've got a lot of information from the conversation tonight to help inform potential changes there, as well as the kind of scenario direction. And so I think we've got great feedback. I will maybe defer to you all if you would like to go through some of these questions on plan elements and decision making. We've included in our memo a draft of the table of contents, so you can kind of see where the plan is going. But knowing that it's almost 9:30, just kind of defer to you all if you want to keep going or provide comments separately.
Are people open to providing comments if they want to? Or do you have any 2 minutes? I'll give you less than public comment. If you wanted to.
Let's take 8 more minutes.
Yeah, yes. 2 minutes a person. No, I was suggesting that. Any reactions to the questions that are on screen now? I mean, I will say just, I had a pretty strong reaction. At one point, there was a proposal before us that would have allowed for potentially 6,000 people at Red Tail, and that threw me off a little bit. So when you ask how much housing is right for the future of Louisville, that seemed like a big number to me at that point in time. I'd have to see it, see it kind of in a bigger context and see how that would be spread, but that's one reaction to this plan, the C plan elements, how much housing is right for the future of Louisville.
I find that to be a difficult question.
Yeah.
Because the future, we can't, I don't know. I mean, I think that the whole point of this is to provide a structure under which we can have the flexibility to meet the future needs as they arise. I know that there's a lot of fear, and we've heard it tonight, about huge numbers of potential people coming in. And I mean, none of us, I think, envision a community of 80,000 here in East Boulder County. But, the number is somewhere, more than none and way less than 80,000.
Right. Yeah.
And I don't know, it's just hard to tell because, again, market, we don't know what the market's going to do. We just have to have the tools in place to be able to address needs as they arise in the future.
Yeah, I think the level of what we're looking at, we tried to build them into the 3 scenarios, was we have the housing plan, which is something around 3,000, 3,500 units, but we could, and again, this is a 10-year plan with a 20-year vision.
Okay.
Think of it that way. This isn't a 50-year vision. But in the next 20 years, do we want to zone to allow 3,500, or aggressive would be 5,000 for the whole city, not just Red Tail Ridge, in relation to the housing plan analysis. The housing plan analysis wasn't a target. It was our proportional share of anticipated growth within about a 20-year period. So if we continued to absorb that proportionally, it'd be about 3,500 additional units. Do we want to try to, I think what we want from you is, do we want to go a little bit higher than that, or are we comfortable with that?
Is that typically 2.3 people per unit?
Not necessarily. That's the number of, that's for single family. I think the housing plan suggests that we focus more on attached, like row homes, and multifamily, which tends to be more, multifamily is more about 1.3, 1.5 people per unit.
Okay. Thank you. Yeah, that's helpful.
With that in mind, I think, I would be in favor of being a little more aggressive, but only a little. We have to do this thoughtfully, right?
And in the right places, yeah.
In the right places, right.
I think it's important to hear the fears of the community. So I am not comfortable being more aggressive than the goals that we've talked about through the housing plan.
Yeah, I think the housing plan's a good start. If we had to put a number to it, I think, I guess in my view, the comprehensive plan, and touching on what's been said, is more the process of how and where you would do it, based on what the target becomes, based on discussion through city council. So I think we should at least be able to accommodate through this plan the housing target, and that seems like a justifiable target for if you had to do it, here's how we would do it.
Everybody's giving their 2 cents, so I will as well. If we did
Your microphone on?
it's always on. If we looked at the housing plan through the analysis of the projected growth of our share of what Boulder County is going to do, and we did it next year, the number would be completely different because it's just based on historical statistical data. So tagging a specific number to this right now is only happenstance that it aligns with whatever number came up with whatever data set we're looking at. So it's in my opinion, it's kind of a fool's errand to try to state a specific number because we don't know what's going to happen tomorrow or the next year or the next time we do the analysis or the regression.
I guess one comment I would make is, and we heard a little bit of this feedback tonight, is, I guess I really would like our housing additions in this plan to really address affordability. And that should be a hallmark of a lot of what we're going to be adding. So
I guess, right, from a municipal perspective, we have the 12% requirement, 12% requirement right now. There's nothing in play to increase that at this point from requirement level.
Right. Yeah. So the housing plan is multi-tiered. It doesn't suggest that it's part of solving the housing problem is having attainable housing too. So we talk about the capital A affordable and then just affordable. So the housing plan focuses on capital A, which is deed restricted, which is that 12% that we have in our ordinance now. And then there's other types of affordable. That's why it focuses on row homes. There's this thought that, going to row homes or that's kind of the new starter home. The starter homes used to be the smaller suburban single family. Now they tend to be more of the row homes. Certainly people build row homes and they're $1 million, which are true. And we had that testimony here this evening. There's no perfect answer to this. It has to be I think our mantra with the housing is there's no one solution. We have to come with lots of different solutions and see what works the best.
So then getting to this question D of what flexibility should exist to allow for changing conditions, do you feel like this provides flexibility within it as the language currently is? I guess I'm hesitant to provide wide open flexibility. That's not okay.
Yeah, I'll chime in. I think part of the layering of that question is the granularity of the future land use map. So on one end of the spectrum, you can have a super predictable map that even gets parcel based, and some communities do that. That's super clear what we want to do, but doesn't allow for a lot of flexibility, right, for places to evolve. So other end of the spectrum is just high level, here's what we want to see. So highly subjective. When a PUD comes in, you don't have a lot of guidance for what we want to see there. You just sort of case by case.
Form-based or? Not necessarily.
Yeah, I mean, that'd be more of something you address in a code, like a, subsequent development code rewrite. But I think that's part of what the question is getting to is like, there's sort of a middle ground in there where you have a map that's flexible enough that allows it to adapt over time, but you also express clearly what you want. So when a developer comes in, it's like, yeah, we're okay with 3 stories here. We're okay with whatever density range or whatever. That's one of the things. It's not necessarily our priority question for you all tonight, but I think that's part of that question is how specific should this be? Because ultimately it should guide future land use decisions, right? As PUDs comes in, as rezonings come in, but you all are the ones that are faced with those decisions, and you'll be inheriting this document, and how do you want to use it? You want it to be flexible or more specific? So I think that's part of that question.
And I'm thinking I might have more feedback on the next iteration, kind of.
Yeah.
When we drill down a little bit further for granularity. Any other?
Not on that, but I do have one. I just want to emphasize on that question C on plan elements. I do want to make sure that we are cognizant of infrastructure aspects in this whole thing, because that's, we heard that several times tonight, and I hear it from friends and neighbors, family members, concerns about transportation, utilities, and services when we add a lot of residential development. Making sure that we're incorporating those questions as we're considering adding houses.
Yeah.
Great. Anything else for this evening?
Thank you.
Okay. Yeah, did you have anything else that might not be all of those questions answered in great detail, but maybe we can revisit some of those as the process proceeds?
Yeah, that sounds wonderful.
All right.
Thanks for the time tonight. Really appreciate really helpful comments from the community and from the commission as we move forward on iterating this. So thank you.
Thank you. Okay, yeah, go ahead.
Just one. So if we do look at these questions and think, oh, I wish I would have added something, it is okay to drop you a line?
Please do. Please do, yeah. Sooner than later, but please do, yeah.
Everybody's encouraged to.
We're expecting a 5th opportunity area from all of you in the next week. Yes.
We're going to go 3-dimensional and yeah. All right. Moving along then, Planning Commission comments, seeing none. Staff comments?
No.
No, okay, great. We've got a few things. Oh, do you need those dates now? And these look like we're good to look at these other 2, ADUs and inclusionary housing ordinance in February. Great, cool.
That's exciting.
Yeah. Motion to adjourn.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Thank you all.